Chapter 281. Action. Why did Lucius seek out Atticus Blaine? Banban, clutching a meringue in his tiny paws, pondered this question intensely. Yet, even after devouring all the sweet cookies, the answer eluded him. As he reached for a pork chop, his movements suddenly halted. Why expend energy on this question? Regardless of the animosity between the Golden Viper and Fenrir Greyback, or why Lucius Malfoy approached Atticus Blaine, these matters were irrelevant to a half-bronze gnat like him. With Sirius still lurking in the shadows, Banban's priority was ensuring Sirius completed his task swiftly. After hiding in the owl hut for so long, Scabbers was no longer as terrified as he once was. Recently, he had been contemplating why he should wait for Sirius to find him, why he should fall into the hands of the Ministry of Magic or Dumbledore instead of eliminating Sirius. If Sirius could never speak again, Scabbers could return to a safe and comfortable life. But how to achieve this? Just as Sirius couldn't pinpoint his location, Banban couldn't locate Sirius either. They were like two hunters in the dark forbidden forest, both lurking and waiting for the other to reveal themselves. Whoever made the first move would be the first to meet death. Malfoy stood there, dumbfounded, while Scabbers scurried back under the shelf. Moments later, he emerged with a folded piece of parchment. Banban spread the hard-earned parchment on the ground, jumped onto it, and carefully examined the names moving across the paper under the bright light. Atticus, hanging outside the window, immediately recognized the object. The Marauder's map. Sirius and Remus had spoken of it. The four of them had created it during their school days, and before leaving, Filch had confiscated this magical parchment. Atticus had once ordered Filch to find the map, but to no avail. Unexpectedly, it had ended up in the hands of Peter Pettigrew. A talent indeed. This thought crossed Atticus's mind. Without some unforeseen accident, capturing this cunning individual might not have been so easy. Seeing this, Atticus lost interest in watching further. He raised his wand, ready to control Peter, who was searching for something on the Marauder's map. The next step was to call Dumbledore back to school to explain everything, let the Ministry of Magic make it public after a trial, and put an end to the matter. However, as he raised his wand, Atticus hesitated. With his back to the moonlight, his eyes flickered with uncertainty for a few seconds before becoming unreadable. Banban continued to search the map intently. With a bit of thought, Atticus realized Peter must be trying to find Sirius. High in the sky, the strong wind swept away the remaining clouds, and the bright moonlight became increasingly graceful. Atticus slowly released a drop of black ink-like liquid from the tip of his wand. The liquid, under the influence of gravity, did not fall to the ground thousands of feet below, but transformed midair into a black tadpole. The tadpole's wagging tail created faint ripples in the air, as if it were swimming in water. It silently swam into the window opening, appearing behind Banban under the cover of weeds and feathers scattered on the ground, and then merged with Scabbers' tail. Banban merely felt a cool sensation on his tail. He turned, wagged it in confusion, and seeing nothing unusual, dismissed it. By midnight, Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle had already been sent away. Atticus Blaine crouched in a hidden corner, his eyes fixed intently on the Marauder's map. The night provided the perfect cover. If Sirius Black intended to infiltrate Hogwarts, he would undoubtedly choose to do so under the cloak of darkness. Since acquiring the map, Atticus had reversed his schedule, resting during the day and vigilantly monitoring Hogwarts at night. However, the Marauder's map was not infallible. Just like Atticus Blaine, Scabbers had returned to the school, yet his name remained absent from the map. Talented wizards often accomplished feats beyond the imagination of ordinary folk, Peter mused, thankful that Sirius was not quite so formidable. What should we do? Peter pondered. In the dead of night, Scabbers no longer bothered to disguise himself. He sprawled across the Marauder's map, his limbs splayed, eyes glinting like dark beads in the dim moonlight. He needed to locate Sirius and devise a plan to eliminate him. Yet these tasks were far from simple. Even if he found Sirius, a direct confrontation was out of the question. The outcome of such a battle was uncertain. Reporting to the Ministry of Magic or alerting the Dementors at the school gates was also not an option. He needed someone else to deal with Black, but certainly not Albus Dumbledore or Atticus Blaine, both of whom were beyond his influence. Suddenly, Peter, lying on the ground, shivered and sprang up, perching nimbly on the windowsill. He peered through the figure of Atticus, who stood less than 10 feet away, gazing thoughtfully at the dark forest. With a new plan forming, Atticus was in no rush. He crossed his arms, curious to see what Pettigrew Peter was plotting. After a few minutes of contemplation, Peter sprang into action. He turned, leapt from the windowsill, scurried under a shelf, and disappeared into a hole in the rock wall. Atticus sensed Scabbers' rapid descent, likely using the ancient pipes embedded in the walls of Hogwarts, much like the basilisk had the previous year. This was not unexpected. After all, it was perfectly natural for a rat to hide in a sewer pipe. Within seconds, Atticus noted that Scabbers had reached the castle's first floor and was heading toward the lawn. To Atticus, Banban's movements were as conspicuous as a lantern in the night. He descended swiftly from the 8th floor, easily tracking Peter's shadowy movements, trailing him like a ghost. A faint light glimmered in Hagrid's hut on the edge of the Forbidden Forest, where Buckbeak slept soundly, his head tucked under his wings in the insect-ravaged vegetable patch. Banban lingered only briefly at the forest's edge before leaping into the vine-choked depths of the Forbidden Forest. Was he trying to escape? Atticus raised an eyebrow, his gaze following Banban as he darted deeper into the forest amidst the dead branches and leaves. It was winter, and the magical creatures of the Forbidden Forest were largely dormant, many hibernating in their lairs. Half an hour into his journey through the forest, Peter stumbled upon a vast expanse of primitive villages, a sight that loomed before Atticus like a revelation. End of this chapter. Chapter 282. This is a tranquil and serene village. In a vast, flat expanse, numerous thatched, dome-shaped wooden houses are scattered about. Centaurs, armed with wooden spears and carrying bows and arrows, tread cautiously along the intersecting stone paths, their eyes vigilant to every detail around them. Is this a centaur tribe? Clearly, this isn't Banban's first visit here. After confirming his location by the tribe's dwellings, he quickly changed direction and departed. However, Atticus Blaine, who had already marked Banban, lingered, intrigued by the village's central square. In the square, a group of elderly centaur elders were engaged in divination. They encircled a roaring fire, periodically tossing sage and fragrant mallow into the flames. As the herbs met the fire, a mysterious green hue emerged from the burning embers, and an enigmatic magical energy began to form in the void. The centaurs have long been renowned in the magical world for their divination skills. Before encountering the druids and the founding Big Four of Hogwarts, Atticus had paid little attention to this branch of magic. The skill demands immense talent, making it inaccessible to ordinary wizards. Even Professor Trelawney, who teaches divination at Hogwarts, is often seen as a mere charlatan riding on the coattails of her ancestors. The most significant challenge is that the future one glimpses is merely a single possibility among countless others in the vast river of time, and the predicted outcome may differ greatly from the actual future. However, after his visit to Avalon Island, Atticus's perspective on the subject had shifted slightly. Perhaps I should take the time to ask the centaurs for a fortune-telling, Atticus pondered. While lost in thought, Peter had already leaped a considerable distance ahead, prompting Atticus to move on. Without disturbing the centaurs patrolling the village, he slipped away like a ghost, silent and unseen. The centaurs' territory lies deep within the Forbidden Forest, a place as confining as a prison. The towering, dark trees exude an indescribable sense of oppression. In the shadows, the kings of magical creatures lie dormant, reigning at the top of the food chain. They possess an innate sense of spirituality that ordinary wizards lack. As Atticus glided past them like the wind, some could faintly sense his presence. Yet, whenever they were about to act on their instincts, a sudden wave of killing intent and a pressure as heavy as mountains and seas forced them to retreat. 10 minutes later, Atticus finally caught up with Scabbers. The creature darted through the forest with remarkable agility, leaping across thin vines entwined around the trees. The terrain had begun to undulate, no longer as flat as a plain. Occasionally, brown or yellow hills jutted out abruptly from the forest, like islands in a sea of ink. Looking back, the towering main castle of Hogwarts had become a faint black silhouette on the horizon. Scabbers slowed its pace, masquerading as an ordinary foraging mouse, humbly scuttling through the decaying leaves and nibbling on a fallen berry. Atticus hovered in midair, his expression unreadable, as he shifted his gaze from Banban to a rocky mountain half a mile away. He then focused on the rotting tree hollows at the roots of some towering trees. Boom! In the forest, as silent as the deep sea, a sudden explosion shattered the tranquility. Two figures in black robes, reminiscent of the underground world, emerged from the dense, impenetrable darkness, entering Atticus's line of sight. One of them discarded an expired portkey on the ground and dragged along a muggle man who showed no signs of life. Atticus Blaine and his companion walked toward the rocky mountain. Stop! As they crossed a certain boundary, the woods suddenly came alive. Atticus's eyes scanned the area, and fierce-looking werewolves sprang out from the shadows. These werewolves appeared disheveled, their clothes tattered and full of holes. Many wielded only their claws as weapons, lacking even a wand. "Where's the leader?" one of the returning werewolves rasped. "Training a fool in a hole who doesn't want to welcome a newcomer," replied another. Among the guarded werewolves, one stood on a tree branch, eyeing the lifeless prey in the hands of the two newcomers. The body bore signs of being bitten and gnawed, and the werewolf smacked his lips in dissatisfaction. "Another muggle?" he sneered. "Wizards aren't so easy to catch," the returnee retorted angrily. "And if wizards start disappearing frequently, the Ministry of Magic will surely go to war. They'll always find a way to discover who kidnapped them." After a brief exchange, the guarded werewolves stepped aside, allowing passage. The two eager werewolves, keen to prove themselves, wasted no time and dragged the hapless muggle, who had foolishly sought eternal life, toward the rocky mountain. Banban, hidden beneath the thick, rotting leaves, felt a flicker of joy in his small black eyes. He had only intended to try his luck, but he hadn't expected to find Greyback, who had once threatened the Malfoy family, and his werewolves still residing here. Years ago, when Peter was a student at Hogwarts, he and his friends ventured deep into the Forbidden Forest. Their original goal was to explore the Centaur tribe, but they accidentally overheard a conversation among the centaurs about werewolves dwelling deeper in the forest. This piqued the interest of James and Sirius, though they kept their thoughts to themselves at the time, knowing Remus was with them and understanding the reason behind his condition. Later, James and Sirius found another opportunity to explore the area the centaurs had mentioned. Peter, fearful, rarely voiced his opinions back then, but as he expected, his thoughts were insignificant and couldn't sway James and Sirius's decision. This was many years ago, just after they had mastered the skill of becoming animagi. If it weren't for Lucius's visit to Atticus Blaine today, reminding him of the conflict between Greyback and the powerful dark wizard known as the Golden Viper, he might have completely forgotten about it. While these werewolves disgusted Peter, he also feared their madness. After confirming their presence, he didn't want to linger a moment longer. Once outside the security circle, he ran wildly toward Hogwarts. Atticus watched Peter leave, then turned his gaze to one of the mountains standing abruptly in the Forbidden Forest, a chill lingering in his otherwise indifferent eyes. After a moment's hesitation, Atticus decided not to approach the rock further, and instead followed Peter. The return journey was quicker than their arrival, and Banban was back in his warm little hut before midnight. Author's note: apologies, everyone. I've been in a bit of a slump lately. Writing this book has significantly impacted my job, and my company leader is quite dissatisfied with my mental state. They've already started to make things difficult for me. I'll adjust and get back on track as soon as possible. End of this chapter. Chapter 283, Midnight. The moonlight cast a silvery glow over the courtyard, where the cold night wind howled and excited owls flapped their wings, gliding silently through the air and casting ghostly shadows on the ground. As soon as he returned to the owl shed, Scabbers retrieved the Marauder's map from its hiding place and lay on the windowsill, examining it under the moonlight. His eyes scanned the parchment repeatedly, but Sirius's name was nowhere to be found. Where could Sirius be hiding? Peter had asked himself this question countless times over the past few days, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find a reasonable answer. Gazing toward the werewolf station, Peter's small eyes reflected his hesitation. Should he continue hiding and wait for Sirius to reveal a flaw, or should he devise a plan to lure Sirius out and eliminate him? Both options had their pros and cons. Unable to decide, Peter sighed deeply. If you're not happy to keep me in the castle, Atticus, I don't mind living in the Forbidden Forest for a few days. You know, my animagus form is not so easy to spot, Sirius said, appearing in front of Atticus as soon as he opened the office door. With a sad and melancholy expression, he added weakly, "But you don't have to do it that way. I mean, starve me to death." "Oh, sorry." Atticus was initially surprised, but quickly apologized. "I forgot about you." Although no longer a professor, Atticus still had the authority to summon the house elves. He instructed them to bring some steaks, but the attentive elves overinterpreted his request for a few pieces. They removed nearly all the ribs from a cow, leaving no room for the large tray of steaks on his desk. Sirius squatted on the ground, devouring the food on the coffee table, while Atticus sat in his chair, sipping green tea and staring thoughtfully at the empty monitoring wall opposite him. This peculiar scene soon caught Sirius's attention. He squinted at Atticus, his chewing slowing down. "What's on your mind?" Atticus snapped back to reality, noticing the concern in Sirius's eyes. He lowered his gaze and smiled. "Nothing. Oh, by the way, did anything happen today?" Seeing Atticus's reluctance to share, Sirius's disappointment was evident, but he understood that Atticus was not Remus or James and couldn't be expected to know everything about him. After a brief silence, Sirius spoke in a soothing tone. "Harry and two of his friends stopped by after dinner today. They knocked on the door for a while and left disappointed." Thinking of Harry's respectful attitude towards Atticus, Sirius couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy and sadness. He was Harry's godfather, yet now they were enemies. "I guess he probably wants me to help him identify the firebolt you gave him." Recalling the evening's events, Atticus nodded slightly. The first weekend of school is the Quidditch match between Gryffindor and Ravenclaw. This game is crucial for Gryffindor. If they lose, they'll miss the chance to win the Quidditch Cup this year. The little guy probably can't wait to prove that this firebolt has nothing to do with you. "Perhaps," Sirius replied, his tone still tinged with disappointment. "You could tell him you gave him the firebolt, Atticus." Glancing at the self-pitying Sirius, Atticus smiled. "I wouldn't dare take credit for your gift. He'll likely come to me tomorrow. I'll help him check it out. Once I find Peter and clear up the issue with you, you can talk to him yourself." The candles in the office flickered out, leaving only the dying embers in the fireplace to cast a warm glow. Sirius lay asleep on the sofa, wrapped in an old robe, while Atticus Blaine remained hunched over the table. He had spent hours meticulously deducing the spell structure of the blood curse, only to set his pen down and cross his arms in contemplation. Such is the nature of magical research. Before the moment of epiphany arrives, countless nights of seemingly useless work are required. Tonight, however, inspiration eluded Atticus. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Atticus finally closed his book and stood up. He changed into his pajamas, but as he prepared to lie down, he realized he wasn't the least bit sleepy. The Hogwarts campus, shrouded in the mystery of the night, was steeped in both magical energy and the weight of its 1,000-year history. With his hands clasped behind his back, Atticus gazed at the West Tower silhouetted against the bright moon. A hint of sarcasm curled at the corner of his mouth. Was Pettigrew Peter still poring over that map in the owl shed, trying to locate Sirius? The day had been fruitful for Atticus. He had discovered the camp of the werewolf pack, led by Greyback. To his surprise, they were living deep within the Forbidden Forest. Did they not fear being discovered by Dumbledore, or were they so confident in their concealment that they believed Dumbledore would never find them? If it was the latter, Atticus thought, these werewolves were naive. Dumbledore's influence extended beyond wizards to half-wizards as well. The werewolves' camp was neither too close nor too far from the centaur tribe, and given the centaurs' strong territorial instincts, it was unlikely they were unaware of the werewolves' presence nearby. Although the Ministry of Magic had a centaur liaison office, centaurs were so detached from the magical world that they wouldn't report such matters to the ministry. However, as headmaster of Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore would likely be informed. Atticus understood Dumbledore's perspective. He believed that if werewolves existed, there was a reason for their existence. As long as they posed no threat to the students, he was willing to allow them a certain space to survive, much like the dark wizards in Nocturne Alley. As long as they didn't disrupt the magical world's stability, Dumbledore wouldn't seek to eliminate them. Yet, Atticus had no intention of letting the werewolves be. The only reason he hadn't dealt with them immediately was Pettigrew Peter. Pettigrew's intentions were transparent, and while Atticus could easily apprehend him, summon Dumbledore, and have him tried by the Ministry of Magic, a previous request from Dumbledore lingered in his mind, causing him to hesitate. In early November, after his Patronus had been altered by a Dementor, Atticus had a conversation with Dumbledore. At the end of their discussion, Dumbledore expressed a desire for Harry and his friends to be involved if Atticus discovered Black's whereabouts after Dumbledore left the school. Atticus understood that Dumbledore wanted to use this as an opportunity to train Harry. However, there had been no chance for Harry to participate in capturing Sirius, and once Sirius's innocence was revealed, the opportunity was lost. Now, with Pettigrew's plans transparent and the dangers well within his control, Atticus felt it was time for Harry and his friends to gain some experience. Perhaps it was the chill of the wind seeping through the open window, combined with 12 long years of imprisonment, that caused Sirius to sleep fitfully on the sofa. In his dreams, it was easy to imagine the faces of those who haunted him. "Then let's play together," Atticus Blaine said with a smile, turning towards his bed. Suddenly, his expression shifted to one of puzzlement. "Why do I feel more and more like an old man?" End of this chapter. Chapter 284, Before School Begins. The day before the start of school, Atticus Blaine's office suddenly became a hub of activity. Early in the morning, Filch appeared outside his door, clutching a stack of documents from Professor McGonagall that required Blaine's approval. Among these official papers, Filch had sneakily included some of his own personal requests. "It is impossible for me to agree to your request to whip a young wizard who violates school rules, Argus," Atticus said gently, wringing his hands as he addressed Filch, who stood before him. "You should know that these ancient punishments are outdated. They are explicitly prohibited by the Ministry of Magic. Even Dumbledore wouldn't be able to make such a decision." Filch nodded in frustration and left the office without a word. However, once he was in the corridor, his demeanor changed. He clenched his right hand into a fist and slammed it into his left palm with excitement. Filch knew that Mr. Blaine would never approve his application. It was merely a diversionary tactic, hoping to distract Blaine from the parchment. To his delight, the trick worked, and Blaine didn't mention the contraband Filch had collected from the students. "This old lunatic," Sirius, having transformed back into his human form, remarked with disgust. "He's always causing trouble for adventurous kids." "That's not entirely fair," Atticus replied casually while flipping through the documents. "Filch loves this school as much as anyone else. Without him, every corridor in the castle would reek of dung bombs. You know what those energetic young wizards are capable of." Sirius's brow relaxed, and he shrugged innocently, dismissing Filch's eccentricities. Shortly after, there was another knock on the office door. Hagrid, wearing his moleskin coat and carrying a small red umbrella, squeezed in. "Oh, Professor, have you ever considered a bigger door?" Hagrid grumbled. "Nobody's going to mess with my door frame but you, Hagrid," Atticus replied with a helpless smile. After a few hearty laughs, Hagrid handed over a piece of parchment covered in crooked handwriting, more obscure than the ancient runes on Slytherin's locket and Ravenclaw's diadem. "I need to buy some medicine to get rid of flesh-eating slugs, Professor. These nasty creatures have been ruining the vegetables in the garden all winter." "It's rare to find a magical creature you dislike, Hagrid," Atticus joked. He then asked Hagrid to read the words on the parchment himself, as he couldn't decipher them. Once he understood, Atticus signed the application form without hesitation. "Thanks, Professor," Hagrid nodded. "I have to see Professor McGonagall to get the funds. I hope I can catch the 9 o'clock train. If I do, I might still make it to the dinner party tonight." As Hagrid turned to leave, muttering about the need for larger fireplaces, Atticus called out. "Wait, Hagrid. Do you need me to bring you something?" Hagrid asked. "No." Atticus shook his head gently. "Actually, I wanted to ask about Buckbeak. Do you have any plans?" This question caught Hagrid by surprise, as it was the first time Professor Blaine had inquired about Buckbeak since the incident. Hagrid's large furry face immediately showed sadness. The Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures. The inquiry meeting for the poor little creature was scheduled for mid-March, and I was busy preparing the necessary materials. To be honest, I'm not very skilled at this sort of thing, but thankfully, Hermione took the time during the holidays to help me out by writing it for me. Atticus Blaine nodded slightly, lowering his head in thought for a moment before speaking in a deep voice. "You must understand, Hagrid, this isn't about right or wrong. The Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures is unlikely to adhere strictly to the rules. Lucius Malfoy is simply trying to take out his anger on you." "I understand, Professor, but Hagrid's eyes were moist, and his voice was thick with emotion. "I can't abandon that creature. It's all my fault. I thought it would befriend the students, and I convinced it to come to my lessons." "Hagrid is still the same," Sirius interjected, seizing the opportunity to voice his opinion. "Crookshanks told me about the hippogriff. Why couldn't he just let Buckbeak go secretly? As long as he didn't leave any clues, with Dumbledore around, the Ministry of Magic wouldn't be able to do anything." Perhaps being expelled made Hagrid more cautious about breaking the law. That Atticus said as he stood up, deciding to leave the pile of tedious documents for now and head to the Great Hall for a delicious breakfast. "But if you want to resolve this, it shouldn't be too difficult, right?" Sirius revealed his intentions. "That scoundrel Malfoy wants something from you. Maybe if you send him a message, he'll drop the lawsuit immediately." "I don't deny that," Atticus nodded, "but I don't want to use that method to help Hagrid. It won't truly solve the problem." Sirius was about to respond when he suddenly found himself transformed into a cat again, just as the office door opened. Harry, Hermione, and Ron burst in, accompanied by the entire Gryffindor Quidditch team and Harry's dormitory mates, who were all crowded in the corridor but didn't enter the office. "I heard you were looking for me everywhere," Atticus said with a smile, looking at the three young wizards who seemed delighted to see him. "I hope it's because you missed me, not just because of the firebolt in your hand." Harry scratched his head and smiled sheepishly. "Oh, you've heard about that, haven't you?" After greeting Professor Blaine, Hermione eagerly shared her thoughts. "Who else would give Harry a broomstick for nothing but you? I mean, it's not just any broom. It's worth more than all the broomsticks owned by the entire Gryffindor team combined." "Not necessarily, Hermione," Ron interjected, unconvinced. "Harry is very famous, and he has as many fans as Lockhart." Hermione's face flushed at the mention of the fraudulent Gilderoy Lockhart. Her past admiration for him was one of the few blemishes she couldn't quite erase. Harry, accustomed to the daily bickering between Hermione and Ron, handed the firebolt to Professor Blaine, who examined the broom's gleaming ash handle with a hopeful look in his eyes. The firebolt was indeed an exceptional flying broom. Its exquisite materials and the intricate magical design within it left Atticus quite impressed. "I see nothing wrong with the broom, Harry, and personally, I think it's safe." As soon as Professor Blaine uttered these words, cheers erupted not only in the office but also from the corridor outside. "I knew it would be like this!" Oliver Wood exclaimed excitedly, pumping his fist in the air. "I want to see who else will stop us from winning the championship this year." "Come and show me on the pitch, Harry." Alicia, one of Harry's teammates, cheered enthusiastically. "I'm not questioning your expertise, Professor," Hermione said, frowning at Atticus Blaine, clearly dissatisfied with his conclusion. "But isn't it peculiar? Who would spend an entire year's salary on such an expensive broomstick for Harry?" "Oh, come on," Ron interjected, seizing the opportunity to tease Hermione in his excitement. "You just have to prove you're right, don't you?" As the trio noisily exited the office, Sirius turned to Atticus with an earnest plea. "Can I go watch Harry train? Staying cooped up here all day feels like being back in Azkaban." "Of course, no problem at all," Atticus replied with a mysterious smile. "I don't want to keep you confined to the office. If you find it too dull, feel free to explore the Forbidden Forest for a few days. You won't need my help to disguise yourself. Your animagus form is perfect. Although, a dog of your size might attract attention on campus. If you could manage to shrink a bit, that would be ideal. Consider it done, Sirius exclaimed happily. Size is not an issue. I have my ways. With that, Sirius transformed into a large black dog, and then with a jaw-dropping eyes of bone clicks, he shrank into a small puppy, no taller than an ottoman. He wagged his tail excitedly at Atticus before dashing out through the automatically opening door, looking utterly delighted. Atticus, leaning against the edge of the table, watched Sirius's retreating figure. Suddenly, he hooked his fingers on his thigh, and the sound of chains breaking echoed in the air. End of this chapter. Chapter 285, Brilliant Performance. The weather in January remained cold and damp, yet the little wizards who hurried to the Quidditch pitch paid no heed to the blustery conditions. They gathered in a circle, with Atticus Blaine at the center, eager to test his skills. Wood glanced at Harry's broom with fervent admiration and urged impatiently, "Find your rhythm first, Harry." Despite the lingering shadow of Sirius's existence, the tedious task of cleaning most of the castle's bathrooms during the Christmas holiday due to Malfoy's informant, and the mysterious origin of his broom, Harry's spirits were unshakably high. He was finally about to soar into the sky on his firebolt. Since receiving the broom, Harry had envisioned this moment every night, and now his dream was about to become reality. He couldn't wait a second longer. The instant Wood gave the command, Harry kicked off the ground, launching himself into the sky like a phantom. The experience surpassed his wildest dreams. The firebolt responded to his slightest touch, seeming to follow his thoughts rather than his commands. Harry streaked across the field at such speed that the stands blurred into green and gray smudges, and with his dynamic vision, he could barely discern the faces of those watching below. Meanwhile, the rest of the Gryffindor team took to the air, rising one by one under Wood's direction. Quidditch was not a game won by a single player. The entire Gryffindor team needed to adjust to Harry's newfound speed, courtesy of the firebolt. Yet, compared to Harry, the others seemed as slow as donkeys pulling a millstone. Like a meteor descending from the heavens, Harry dove into the Gryffindor team as they practiced their attack formation. He fell in front of Arya Spinnet, eliciting a scream, and then expertly controlled his speed and angle. The broom leveled out just 5 feet from the ground before soaring back into the air, 30 feet, 40 feet, 50 feet. "That's not something an ordinary person can do," Ron exclaimed, his excitement palpable. He watched enviously, imagining himself flying with such grace one day. "He can't be more careful." Hermione's expression was less enthusiastic. She struggled to keep her windblown hair in check and frowned, voicing her concern. "Harry's a bit too excited, isn't he? This broom. I think Professor Blaine should keep an eye on it. If, and I mean if, his judgment is wrong, at least there's a chance for redemption." Hermione's complaints went unheard, as everyone was captivated by Harry's breathtaking flying skills. "Harry, I'm releasing the snitch," Wood shouted to the sky, sensing the time was right. Upon hearing Wood's call, Harry dove once more, this time weaving between Fred and George, who flew side by side. The golden snitch, elusive as a shadow, accelerated as it appeared, only to be swiftly captured by Harry's hand. The Quidditch field erupted in wild cheers. Fred and George clapped and shouted, "One more time, Harry." Obliging, Harry let the golden snitch slip from his grasp, allowing it to circle the pitch before pursuing it again. He executed an S-shaped maneuver to bypass several teammates, then abruptly lifted his broom, whistling past Katie Bell's head in a graceful arc, finally seizing the golden snitch once more. In the backdrop of the Quidditch pitch, under a darkened sky, the distant white-capped mountains and the towering hoop nearby framed the scene perfectly. Atticus Blaine, astride his firebolt, turned triumphantly, raising his right hand to display the captured golden snitch. He gazed down at the stadium, embodying the essence of a Quidditch king. In that moment, the only sound that pierced the air was the roar of the crowd's cheers. Flying is truly an art, and at least in this, Malfoy can't hold a candle to Atticus, Hermione remarked, clapping her hands with a calm satisfaction. "That scoundrel flies slower than Hedwig," Ron exclaimed, his palms red from clapping. He eagerly pushed through the Gryffindor players as they landed one by one, ready to ask Atticus if he got have a chance to try the firebolt later. In my opinion, nothing can stop us from winning, Wood declared with a conviction stronger than when he stood outside Professor Blaine's office. I bet you, Atticus, Fred said, patting him on the shoulder with admiration. Even those Dementors couldn't catch up to you. This was the best training session they had ever experienced. The arrival of the firebolt had invigorated the team, and for the first time, Wood found no faults to criticize. May I try the firebolt too, Atticus? Seamus asked wistfully. Quidditch, the most beloved sport in the wizarding world, was no exaggeration. It was only due to Atticus's exceptional talent that his peers seemed overshadowed, though many secretly practiced Quidditch in private. Hey, wait your turn, Ron glared at Seamus, dissatisfied. Atticus and I already talked about it. You have to wait behind me. No one is allowed to touch this broom until our match with Ravenclaw is over. Wood's sharp voice cut through their hopes. His obsession with the Quidditch trophy was all-consuming, and he couldn't risk any mishaps with Gryffindor's best chance at victory, even if the firebolt wasn't his, even if it was Atticus's roommate making the request. Faced with Wood's strict prohibition, Atticus could only shrug innocently at the disappointed Ron and Seamus. The Gryffindor students, eager to witness the firebolt's prowess, had even skipped breakfast. As Wood announced the end of training, they ambled back towards the castle in pairs and groups. After consoling Ron, Atticus planned to head to the Great Hall to grab a bite. His excitement had reached its peak, but suddenly he felt a peculiar sensation, as if someone was watching him. Following this instinct, Atticus turned his head and was taken aback by what he saw. What's wrong? Hermione, ever skeptical of the firebolt, immediately sensed something amiss with Atticus. She followed his gaze and raised her eyebrows in surprise at the sight on the bottom step of the stands. It was Crookshanks, sitting there with an air of nonchalance. But it wasn't alone. Beside it was a dog, about the same size as Crookshanks. Crookshanks, did you slip out of Hagrid's again? Hermione exclaimed, running over with delight. Ron, the last to notice the two small animals, scowled at the sight of Crookshanks and reluctantly followed behind Atticus, grumbling under his breath. First, it was that cat named Lenny, and now it's a dog. This creature sure knows how to make friends. Why can't it leave Scabbers alone? As Atticus and Ron reached the stands, Hermione was already cradling Crookshanks, stroking its furry head affectionately. Ron watched with a cold stare, while Atticus's attention was drawn not to Hermione and her cat, but to the little black dog beside them. Squatting on the steps, the scene was peculiar. Harry couldn't shake the feeling that the dog seemed oddly familiar. There was something about the way it gazed at him. Was it a sense of comfort? End of this chapter. Chapter 286. Luck. Oh, Crookshanks! Hermione gently rubbed the big ginger cat's head, her expression tinged with guilt, yet she managed to smile. How's Hagrid doing, Crookshanks? Meow, Crookshanks responded, licking his paw and nuzzling his furry face against Hermione's hand. Seeing that Crookshanks held no grudge, Hermione felt even more sorrowful. She took a deep breath as if trying to gather her courage, and then turned to Ron. Ron, I think it's time for Crookshanks to go back to living in the castle. You can't. She faltered, unable to continue, as Ron had already grasped her meaning, and his face turned sour. You think? Harry interjected, staring at the little black dog that seemed uneasy. Where did Crookshanks find this dog? The atmosphere between Hermione and Ron grew tense because of Crookshanks. Neither answered immediately. After a long pause, Hermione sniffled and said with suppressed emotion, It's hard to say, Harry. Maybe Hagrid found Fang because he felt a little lonely. Maybe we can ask Hagrid, Harry suggested suddenly. Both Ron and Hermione looked at him, surprised by his suggestion. The little black dog, squatting on the steps, seemed reluctant to visit Hagrid. It turned to run away, but its agility was no match for Harry's quick reflexes. As soon as it leaped down the steps, Harry swiftly caught it, preventing its escape. Harry tossed the firebolt he had been holding to Ron, and with the black dog in his arms, sprinted towards Hagrid's hut on the edge of the forbidden forest. Although Ron and Hermione were puzzled, they followed Harry's determined lead. The closed door of the hut spoke volumes. Harry looked disappointed, but still scanned the area, spotting Fang playing with goblins in the grassy field to the west of the hut. "Hey, Fang!" Harry called out loudly. Upon hearing his voice, Fang abandoned the goblins and bounded over, tongue lolling happily. "Where's Hagrid?" Harry asked, patting Fang's head. "Did he go to patrol the Forbidden Forest?" Fang shook his head, his eyes glancing towards the school gate. "Looks like Hagrid's out," Ron remarked as he and Hermione caught up. Seeing the scene, Ron shrugged. "You seem to care about this dog, Harry," Hermione noted curiously. "Is there something wrong with it?" "I can't say for sure, Hermione," Harry replied after a moment of silence. He turned the black dog's head, frowning as he stared into its eyes. "But I feel like I've seen it somewhere. It gives me a very familiar feeling." "Maybe it's just your imagination, Harry," Ron suggested, fiddling with the firebolt. Harry had tossed him. He glanced longingly at the broom's smooth ash shaft and perfectly trimmed branches. "Or maybe you saw it in Hogsmeade. The villagers there like to keep dogs for hunting and guarding their homes." "You're right, Ron," Harry conceded, pursing his lips. He set the trembling black dog on the ground. They were on the Hogwarts campus now, and if Harry had indeed found any clues, a couple of barks might attract unwanted attention. Sirius couldn't be sure whether Atticus Blaine would arrive first, or if the Dementors lurking at the school gate would come. Those dreadful creatures wouldn't listen to explanations. "So what do we do now, Harry? Are you going to leave it here or take it back to the castle?" Hermione asked. "Just forget it," Harry decided after a brief thought. He didn't particularly like dogs and didn't want to risk detention from Filch before the Quidditch match on the first weekend of school. "Then, let it stay here. Hagrid will take care of it," Hermione suggested. "It's a playmate for Crookshanks." The incident with the little black dog was merely a minor episode for Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Tomorrow marked the first day of school, and most of their classmates had already returned to Hogwarts. Harry was thrilled to be back, especially with his firebolt in hand. Even if Black were to storm the castle, nothing could dampen his spirits. After Hermione entrusted Crookshanks to Fang, the trio turned and made their way toward the call, Stella. Sirius, who had been startled by Harry's presence, finally breathed a sigh of relief as he watched Harry walk away. Dodging Fang's slobbering tongue, Sirius glanced toward the Forbidden Forest, where distant cries occasionally echoed. His gray eyes sparkled with the excitement of newfound freedom. He didn't notice the panoramic telescope, camouflaged against the sky, hovering above Hagrid's vegetable garden. Once it saw Harry return to the castle and Sirius leap into the Forbidden Forest, the telescope soared like an eagle, circling twice before darting toward the west tower. As the clouds rolled and cleared, the moon rose and the sun set. In the darkened castle, bright candlelight shone through the windows, mingling with the laughter echoing across the campus, illuminating the deep night. Tonight was the first gathering of teachers and students in the auditorium since last semester's Halloween night, yet Dumbledore had not returned. It was a perfect opportunity. Scabbers, perched on the Marauders' map, showed no interest in the castle teeming with names. His vigilant eyes scanned the map's periphery. As the lights went out one by one, there was still no sign of danger. Could it be that Black had truly given up on seeking revenge? In the stillness of the night, Peter gazed at the bright moon hanging high in the sky, confusion flickering in his eyes. No, it couldn't be, he reassured himself. He knew Sirius well enough to understand that someone like him wouldn't abandon his plans easily. The 12 years in prison had likely made Sirius more patient, less impulsive. This change in Sirius was undoubtedly perilous for Peter. Peter sighed, dismissing his naive fantasies, and refocused on the map. Filch was patrolling the second-floor corridor, Snape was leaving Remus's office and heading to Slytherin's underground space. Professor McGonagall was returning to her office from the professor's bathroom, and Hagrid, along with Fang, was preparing to retire to his hut. As Peter followed Hagrid and Fang back to the hut, he glanced toward the school gate. Suddenly, a name appeared behind the hut, startling Peter. His small, black eyes widened in shock. On the third floor of the castle, in the security office, Atticus Blaine leaned back in his chair, observing the single image formed by hundreds of small screens on the opposite wall. A slight smile played on his lips. "So, what are you going to do, Peter?" he mused. End of this chapter. Chapter 287, Departure. Perhaps it was the accumulation of new experiences over the Christmas vacation or the anticipation of the upcoming Quidditch match that would determine the fate of two houses. Whatever the reason, before anyone could fully recover, the first Saturday of the school term had arrived. Today was the day Gryffindor and Ravenclaw would face off. The weather was unusually pleasant for January. The sky was clear and dry, devoid of gusty winds or oppressive clouds. As the golden dawn filtered through the castle's doors and windows, it cast a lively glow across the great hall. The staff table was already filled with professors, all eager witnesses to the forthcoming game. Professor McGonagall, typically strict and composed, seemed a bit distracted today. As she sipped pumpkin soup with a silver spoon, her gaze frequently wandered to the steps in the foyer, so much so that she didn't notice when some soup dripped onto the table. Her colleagues noticed her distraction, but weren't surprised, knowing the significance of the match for Gryffindor. "Don't worry, Minerva," Professor Lupin said gently, despite the dark circles under his eyes. "The Gryffindor team is strong, and Harry has a brand new broom. I think they have a good chance of winning." Why wouldn't anyone want to send a firebolt to a Ravenclaw seeker? Professor Flitwick's voice was tinged with disappointment, having already resigned himself to the likely outcome of the match. "The team led by that kid Cedric is the strongest Hufflepuff has had in years, but I don't think they have a good chance of winning," Professor Sprout added with a touch of melancholy. She turned to Professor Snape, who sat silently nearby. "By the way, Severus, how many years has Slytherin been champion?" 7 years, Professor McGonagall replied with a sullen expression. It was clear she had long harbored resentment over this fact, though she rarely voiced it. The professors, perceptive as they were, detected the lament in Minerva's tone. Snape, slightly embarrassed, was about to respond when Atticus Blaine approached the staff table from the Slytherin table, casting a calm glance at Draco Malfoy as he passed. Atticus was accustomed to sitting next to Professor Snape, but as he settled in for breakfast, he noticed all eyes were on him. He blinked and smiled casually. "Is there something wrong, everyone?" "Why are you dressed like that?" Snape inquired, eyeing Atticus's black slacks and brown jacket, entirely Muggle attire. "Oh, it's actually—" Atticus seemed oblivious to how out of place he looked among the faculty, all clad in wizard robes. He blinked and addressed Professor McGonagall, raising his voice slightly so that everyone at the table, and even the students seated nearby, could hear. "I received a letter last night. It's a bit urgent, and I have to go to London today. But don't worry, Professor McGonagall. If all goes well, I should be back in time for tomorrow's breakfast." "You're going out, Atticus?" Professor McGonagall frowned, pursing her lips as she pondered for a few seconds. She looked a bit conflicted, but eventually spoke. "While it is your right to come and go from Hogwarts as you please, Atticus, have you thought this through? You must know what day it is today. If the creatures guarding the gate—" At the school gate, there was a palpable tension. The memory of the last match between Gryffindor and Hufflepuff lingered heavily in the air. During that game, the Dementors had collectively lost control due to hunger, nearly leading to disastrous consequences. Professor McGonagall still harbored deep concerns about the incident. "Don't worry, Professor McGonagall," Atticus Blaine reassured her. "I believe the Ministry of Magic and the Dementors understand the grave consequences of entering the campus without permission again." Despite his words, Professor McGonagall remained unconvinced, though she couldn't argue further, as Atticus was well within his rights. A brief silence settled over the staff table. Atticus contentedly focused on cutting his sausage, while Severus and Remus eyed him with suspicion. Realizing they were both observing Atticus, they exchanged a quick glance before looking away. Suddenly, a wave of enthusiastic cheers erupted from the foyer. The professors turned their attention to see the Gryffindor team, clad in their scarlet uniforms, making a grand entrance. To boost morale, Wood had strategically placed Harry at the front, prominently displaying the Firebolt nameplate. The effect was immediate and electrifying, causing chairs to clatter as students stood up in excitement. "You never mentioned Harry had a firebolt before you bet me 10 galleons," Miss Clearwater exclaimed amidst the commotion, directing her words at Percy. "Trust me, Penelope," Percy replied awkwardly. I only just found out myself. In stark contrast to the Gryffindor team's warm reception, the Ravenclaw team, led by Captain Davis and Seeker Cho Chang, received little attention. As they entered the auditorium, few noticed their presence. I must encourage them. It's too early to lose hope, Professor Flitwick declared, unable to remain seated. He leapt from his distinctive stool and hurried across the hall to rally the Ravenclaw team. His departure seemed to signal the other professors, who began leaving the table as well. Some bypassed the students entirely, heading upstairs, while Professor McGonagall and Madam Hooch pushed through the crowd to reach Harry. Meanwhile, Snape, his expression stern, approached Atticus. "What were you doing in London, and who wrote to you?" he demanded, as most eyes remained on Harry and the firebolt. "Lucius Malfoy," Atticus replied with a slight smile. He mentioned in his letter that he found clues about the group that previously threatened him and asked for my assistance. Atticus spoke openly, then paused to retrieve a key from his pocket, tossing it to Snape. "This is the key to my office. While I'm away, could you keep an eye on it, in case anyone needs me and can't find me?" Atticus's words carried an underlying message that Snape couldn't quite decipher. After a moment of contemplation, Snape hesitantly asked, "And in London?" "Don't worry, everything's fine," Atticus replied nonchalantly, wiping his mouth with a tablecloth. Recognizing Atticus's reluctance to delve deeper into the topic, Snape sighed inwardly and left his seat. "Our friend?" Remus, who had been observing from the sidelines, approached Atticus. "I've been preoccupied with classes and not feeling my best. Has he caused you any trouble?" Atticus glanced at Remus, assessing his condition. With a peculiar look in his eyes, he paused before responding. "He's been with me long enough and doesn't want to bother you. He's been staying in the Forbidden Forest for the past few days." A few days had passed, and Atticus Blaine had been spending his nights with Crookshanks, Hermione's cat. Hey Greg had even made a cozy den for the feline. "Don't worry about him, Remus," Atticus reassured. "I think you should head back to your office and get some rest." "That's what I planned," Remus replied with a helpless smile. "But I need to stay until Harry's game is over. Oh, we can't be certain that the Dementors are completely harmless, especially when I'm not at the school. It's important to keep a vigilant eye on things." "Indeed," Atticus agreed with a mysterious smile. "Well, good luck to you, Remus." With that, Atticus didn't give Remus a chance to ask further questions. He stood up and made his way swiftly to the auditorium, his gaze fixed ahead. Without a backward glance, he strode out of the castle, his figure vanishing into the golden morning light. End of this chapter. Chapter 288, Victory. The Quidditch Stadium, usually a place of joy and excitement, was now enveloped in a tense atmosphere under the bright sunshine. The reason was simple. The stakes of this year's Quidditch Cup were higher than ever. Hufflepuff had already been defeated by Ravenclaw, effectively ending their chances of winning the championship. The students of Hufflepuff were present merely to enjoy the spectacle, but for Ravenclaw, the stakes were much higher. They remained strong contenders for the title, needing only to defeat Gryffindor today to earn the right to challenge Slytherin. Slytherin, the defending champions, were keenly hoping for a Gryffindor loss. This was not only due to the traditional rivalry between the two houses, but also because the Gryffindor team, led by Harry Potter, posed a significant threat. For Slytherin, a Ravenclaw victory today would allow their captain, Marcus Flint, to confidently declare that the glory of the championship would remain with Slytherin. In this charged atmosphere, two houses were rooting for Gryffindor's defeat. Yet, Gryffindor, known as the House of Courage, was undeterred by the unfriendly environment. The young wizards of Gryffindor shouted passionately, hoping their team would feel their unwavering support. "Oh, sorry, Remus." Hagrid's voice boomed as he ascended the steps behind the stands. Spotting a seat behind Hermione and Ron, he carefully maneuvered over Professors McGonagall and Flitwick, nearly losing his balance in the process. "It's all right, Hagrid," Remus Lupin replied, rubbing his shoulder with a wry smile. Just as he was about to inquire about Hagrid's tardiness, a small black dog peeked out from Hagrid's tangled hair. Remus instantly recognized the dog and exchanged a surprised look with it, receiving a slightly embarrassed glance in return. Hermione, noticing the commotion, turned around and spotted Sirius perched on Hagrid's shoulder. "How did you bring it, Hagrid, Crookshanks?" she asked. "I'm hunting goblins in the vegetable patch with Fangya." "I'm not taking it with me, Hermione," Hagrid explained, poking the little black dog's cheek. "As soon as I was about to leave, this little guy ran towards the field on his own. It took a lot of effort to lock him in the house, but after a few steps, he jumped out of the window. No matter what I tried, it didn't work." Remus chuckled, recalling how Atticus Blaine had mentioned Sirius living in the Forbidden Forest. He hadn't expected Sirius to be so familiar with Hagrid. "Oh, damn it!" Ron suddenly exclaimed, echoing the sentiments of the surrounding students. Professor McGonagall clenched her fists, her breath held in anticipation. "What just happened?" Hermione asked urgently, watching Harry pull away from a pillar. Harry almost caught the snitch, but the Ravenclaw beater slammed a bludger at him, interrupting his attempt. Ron replied angrily. The game was intense, with the score between Gryffindor and Ravenclaw quickly reaching a tie. Ravenclaw's Seeker had devised a strategy to counter Harry, choosing not to compete directly for the snitch, but instead flying around him to disrupt his focus. "Despicable tactic," Hermione fumed, recognizing Cho Chang's strategy. "Why can't we have a fair competition?" "Hermione, that's not entirely fair," Ron interjected, trying to offer a more balanced perspective. Remus glanced at Sirius with a smile and remarked, "Miss Cho Chang's decision is quite astute, isn't it? Competing in speed with Harry, who has the firebolt, is simply out of the question." Despite this, Cho Chang's strategy wasn't particularly endearing, especially to the young wizards of Gryffindor. They could accept being defeated head-on in the arena, but strategies and tactics were not their forte. They viewed them as akin to trickery and intrigue. "Harry, this is not the time to be a gentleman," Wood shouted from the sidelines to the hesitant Harry. "Knock her off the broom if you have to." "I understand, Wood," Harry replied, feeling a pang of guilt. He turned his head to see Cho Chang Trey, Ling not far behind him. The strong wind whipped through the hair of the beautiful Asian girl from Ravenclaw, making it flow like a waterfall. She noticed Harry's gaze and smiled at him in the golden sunlight. In that moment, Harry's heart pounded violently, and an inexplicable feeling of breathlessness surged through him, causing his grip on the broomstick to feel slightly numb. What a peculiar sensation, Harry thought to himself. But this was a game, and he didn't have time to ponder why. As he tore his eyes away from Cho Chang's smiling face, he felt a twinge of loss and forced himself to concentrate on the match. Of course, he couldn't bring himself to knock Cho Chang off her broom, as Wood suggested. If it had been Malfoy, he wouldn't have hesitated. But he needed to shake off Cho Chang. If he allowed her to keep staring at him like this, he would be unable to perform in the match. After a brief moment of thought, Harry devised a plan. He pushed the broomstick's handle down, diving toward the ground at high speed. As expected, Cho thought he had spotted the snitch and quickly followed. Everything in his vision blurred as they plummeted through the air at an incredible speed. When they were still 30 feet from the ground, Harry suddenly leveled his broom, decelerated briefly, and shot back into the sky. Cho, unprepared for this maneuver, skidded across the lawn for a considerable distance before regaining control. This was precisely what Harry had intended. With his flying skills, he could have halved the braking distance if he wanted to. Harry soared upward like a bullet, and while Cho was still regaining control of her broom, his eyes scanned the pitch. He spotted the snitch glinting above the Ravenclaw side. The world seemed to fall silent, and the only sound he could hear was his own heartbeat. When his fingertips brushed against the cold metal ball and Mrs. Hooch's whistle echoed across the field, Harry finally heard the eruption of cheers. Since losing the previous match due to the intrusion of Dementors, the Gryffindor students had been brooding for 2 long months. The pent-up frustration was finally released in this moment of triumph. Many gathered around Harry, expressing their excitement. As he looked around, he spotted Ron and Hermione at the back of the crowd, eagerly pushing forward, and Hagrid standing like a wall. He also noticed the small black dog perched on Hagrid's shoulder. The dog behaved peculiarly, squatting on Hagrid's shoulder, clapping its paws like a human, with tears in its eyes. The scene was so bizarre that Harry rubbed his eyes, almost thinking he was dreaming. But the truth was, the dog was celebrating his victory in a distinctly human-like manner. End of this chapter. Chapter 289. Resurrection from the Dead? The last game's defeat had hit Gryffindor hard, so when they triumphed over Ravenclaw this time, the young wizards of Gryffindor celebrated as if they had won the Quidditch Cup itself. Harry, caught up in the excitement, momentarily forgot about the curious behavior of the little black dog. Surrounded by his jubilant classmates, he returned to the castle, where a celebration was already underway. During the festivities, Fred and George Weasley disappeared for 2 hours. When they returned, their arms were laden with butterbeer, pumpkin pops, and several large bags of Honeydukes candy. "How did you get these?" Angelina Johnson asked, catching a peppermint toad candy tossed by George. "With a little help from Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs," Fred whispered to Harry, a mischievous glint in his eye. "The secret passage has been opened?" Harry asked, surprised. He had thought that after his last trip to Hogsmeade through the secret passage, Professor Blaine had sealed all the routes recorded on the Marauder's map. At that time, he and Fred had informed George, hoping to avoid crossing Professor Blaine. "It's been a while," George said, his voice tinged with emotion. "Professor Blaine is really a good man, isn't he? He probably left some ways open for us to have fun, knowing how dull classwork can be." "I'm sure you haven't forgotten," Hermione interjected, overhearing the conversation while chatting with Ginny. "Professor Blaine's eyes are all over the castle. But he's out on errands today and isn't at Hogwarts. Many young wizards saw him during breakfast." Ron chimed in with a grin. With Professor Dumbledore away and Professor Blaine absent, it seemed like the perfect opportunity for Sirius Black to make a move. However, Harry dismissed the thought, feeling it was too coincidental for Black to be so well-informed. He pushed the worry aside, raised his glass, and greeted Siamus, who was making his way through the crowd with a respectful expression. As Harry drank the warm butterbeer, his earlier unease vanished. Just then, the portrait of the fat lady swung open, and Percy Weasley entered with a disgruntled look. Ignoring the chaos in the lounge, he grabbed a bottle of butterbeer, raised it towards Harry, and downed most of it in one go. "What's the matter, Percy?" Ginny asked, covering her mouth to stifle a laugh. "Did your girlfriend agree to pay you 10 galleons? Percy's face darkened further at Ginny's question. "Penelope said she only made the bet because she didn't know Harry had the firebolt. She threatened to break up with me if I mentioned it again." Laughter erupted near the fireplace, drowning out the noise in the common room. More young wizards joined the celebration, and the revelry continued unabated through lunch and dinner. By 9 o'clock in the evening, Harry, full of butterbeer and soda, collapsed onto a soft cushioned sofa. Ron was in a similar state, while Hermione, still alert, sat at a coffee table engrossed in family life and social habits of British muggles. She stared intently at the exquisite illustrations, seemingly unaffected by the day's festivities. The candle lamps hanging from the ceiling had been burning for so long that Atticus Blaine's eyes began to feel sore. He lowered his head and rubbed them, wondering if it was time to take a break. Just then, Colin, a second-year student, appeared with a camera, and the sudden flash made Atticus's eyes even more uncomfortable. It was definitely time to rest. With this thought, Atticus stood up, intending to say hello to Ron. However, as his gaze drifted past the doorway behind the portrait of the fat lady, his movements suddenly halted. His cheeks, flushed from the butterbeer, were now tinged with confusion. The noise in the room seemed to vanish inexplicably. Atticus tilted his head, staring at the small creature squatting at the entrance of the passage. He thought Colin's camera flash had caused him to hallucinate, so he blinked rapidly and looked again. To his surprise, the creature was real. It gazed back at him with flickering eyes, a mysterious allure in its expression. "Ron?" Atticus called softly. "I might have had too much butterbeer, but I think you should see the door for yourself." Ron mumbled incoherently, wanting to look up, but the drowsiness and numbness in his body thwarted his efforts. He didn't even muster the energy to ask Atticus what he was referring to. Atticus continued to stare intently at the entrance, fearing that if he looked away, the creature would vanish. "Hermione," he called to another friend, seeking her confirmation. After all, this was important for their friendship with Ron. "Oh, what's the matter?" Hermione replied, slightly irritated at being interrupted from her studies. "I still have 420 pages to read in this book." Despite her annoyance, she followed Atticus's gaze, her expression mirroring his as if she had seen a ghost. Time seemed to stand still as Atticus and Hermione, now standing unconsciously, stared in disbelief at the mouse-like creature at the doorway, both feeling as if they were in a dream. "I think you better see what that is, Ron," Hermione said, her voice trembling. She made the same request to Ron that Atticus had. This time, Ron finally reacted. He braced himself against the table, looking as if he might be sick at any moment, and slowly turned his gaze toward the portrait of the fat lady. At that moment, the portrait swung open, and Percy, who had been inspecting the castle, entered. He found the Gryffindor common room exactly as he had left it earlier that night, and was about to express his frustration when a sudden gust of cool wind swept up his robe. Astonished, he glanced down, catching a glimpse of a yellow, ghost-like figure darting away from his feet. "Spotted!" Before Percy could turn around, Ron dashed past him, brushing his shoulder as he rushed out of the doorway, causing Percy to spin around in surprise. Ron! Although he didn't fully understand what was happening, Atticus quickly regained his composure and followed Ron without hesitation. "Wait, Atticus!" Hermione called out, stepping away from the sofa to follow them. She suddenly remembered something and tried to stop Atticus, but he ignored her shouts. Frustrated, she stomped her foot, then turned back to grab Atticus's school bag from the sofa. She pulled out the invisibility cloak, draped it over her arm, and hurried out of the lounge. "Hey, you can't openly violate school rules in front of a prefect!" Percy shouted angrily. "Just this once, Percy," Hermione replied, waving dismissively as she disappeared down the stairs. End of this chapter. Chapter 290, The Unknown Situation. The sound of hurried footsteps shattered the silence of the castle, rousing the portraits lining the corridor from their slumber. They watched the young wizard dash past like a gust of wind, clicking their tongues in disapproval as he disappeared from view. "Goodness, can't you wait for me?" Hermione finally caught up with Harry and Ron as they descended to the 5th floor. She was breathless, brushing away strands of hair that kept falling into her eyes with her small, pale hands. Harry was about to ask Hermione what had delayed her, but his eyes fell on the invisibility cloak she was holding. He couldn't help but admire her quick thinking. "I didn't even consider that, Hermione. Your reaction is impressive," Harry admitted. "You'll see," Hermione replied, her nose in the air with pride. She glanced at Scabbers, who was surprisingly agile, and her expression was one of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. "My judgment is always accurate." Harry and Ron remained silent, but they both understood what Hermione was implying. Scabbers was alive, which meant Crookshanks was innocent. They had indeed misjudged Hermione before. This realization filled Harry with guilt, but also confusion. Scabbers seemed perfectly healthy, showing no signs of injury. What, then, had caused the blood on Ron's bedsheets and the presence of Crookshanks' hair on that Halloween night? As Harry pondered this, Hermione suddenly grabbed both Harry and Ron by their collars, pulling them behind a tapestry at the corner. Ron was about to protest, but Hermione gestured for silence. It was Professor Lupin, walking down the corridor with a toothbrush and toiletries. He should have noticed them, but his face was paler than usual, and his steps were unsteady, as if he were dizzy. This was why he didn't see them rushing down from upstairs. The wait was agonizing. Though it lasted only 20 seconds, it felt like an eternity. When Professor Lupin finally opened a door and disappeared inside, Ron immediately bolted down the corridor. "I never understood," Harry began, following Ron, but his mind was elsewhere. "Why does Professor Lupin always look so ill?" "This," Hermione panted, glancing quickly at the moon outside the window. She opened her mouth to speak, but then thought better of it. "Oh, thank goodness!" Ron exclaimed as they reached the ground floor and saw Scabbers in sight again. Scabbers seemed intent on leaving the castle, and as the trio descended the marble steps and emerged into the open air, Ron shouted impatiently, "Scabbers, what are you doing, you idiot? It's me, Ron!" Ron's anxious calls echoed across the breezy playground, but Scabbers ignored his former master's pleas. racing along the path toward the school gate. It seemed they might lose him entirely. The three friends and the mouse sprinted across half the campus, following the path. Suddenly, Scabbers veered off into the grass. "Hey, come on, Scabbers!" Ron cried, chasing after him onto the lawn, heading toward the edge of the forbidden forest. But within moments, they lost sight of Scabbers completely. The bright moonlight illuminated Ron's bewildered face, making him appear helpless. Seeing his distress, Hermione, who was out of breath, held back any further comments. She was considering asking Crookshanks to return to the castle. "What on earth is going on, Ron?" Harry asked, wiping the sweat from his brow. His eyes scanned the lawn, swaying gently in the wind, but he found nothing unusual. "I don't know, Harry," Ron replied, shaking his head in confusion. "I've never seen Scabbers act like that. What could he be afraid of?" Suddenly, a sharp and frantic barking erupted from the direction of Hagrid's hut, piercing through the rustling of the trees. "It's Fang!" Hermione exclaimed, her voice tinged with urgency. "Hagrid must be in trouble. We have to check it out," Harry said, echoing Hermione's concern. Despite his reluctance, Ron knew he couldn't ignore the situation. He had been preoccupied with finding Scabbers, especially after the rat's mysterious disappearance 2 months ago. Apologizing to Hermione was a small price to pay if it meant finding Scabbers alive. However, Fang's distressed barking and the possibility of Hagrid being in danger took precedence. The trio hurried towards Hagrid's hut, covering the short distance in mere seconds. They soon spotted Hagrid's towering figure, standing on a small slope outside his house, staring intently at the dark expanse of the forbidden forest. Fang was beside him, barking furiously in the same direction. "What's going on, Hagrid?" Harry called out from about 50 or 60 feet away. "We heard Fang barking. Is everything all right?" Hearing Harry's voice and the sound of their approaching footsteps, Hagrid turned to face them. His expression mirrored the bewilderment they had felt earlier when they found Scabbers in the common room. "Oh, it's you three," Hagrid said, clearly overwhelmed by the situation. He seemed unfazed by the fact that Harry, Ron, and Hermione were out on the grounds at such a late hour. "I just saw Malfoy running into the forbidden forest." "Malfoy?" the trio exclaimed in unison, their voices a mix of surprise and confusion. "Yeah," Hagrid continued, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I was going over the materials to help Buckbeak's defense when I heard Fang barking. I thought he had found some animal trying to sneak onto the grounds, so I rushed out. But it was Malfoy, standing at the edge of the forbidden forest with a broomstick and a rat perched on his head." Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged incredulous glances. It seemed impossible. Perhaps Malfoy, spurred by Harry's impressive performance earlier, had decided to practice his flying skills alone. But the rat, if it was indeed Scabbers, was a mystery. How could Scabbers have ended up with Malfoy so quickly? Could Malfoy have his own rat? And then there was this little black stray dog, Hagrid continued, oblivious to their thoughts. "It used to hang around the den I made for Crookshanks. When it saw Malfoy, it suddenly transformed, growing dozens of times its size, much larger than Fang. It charged at Malfoy, carrying Crookshanks, as if it wanted to attack him." The idea of a dog changing size and attacking Malfoy was so fantastical that even Hermione was at a loss for an explanation. "I've never seen a dog that could change size," Hagrid mused, his interest piqued. "Maybe it's a special breed created by some wizard." "If that's the case, I'll definitely come to you for advice," Hermione exclaimed. Suddenly, she noticed something off about Harry's expression. He looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. Worried, she asked, "What's wrong, Harry? What did you remember?" "I've seen that dog," Harry replied slowly, his face growing increasingly tense. As Hagrid described the creature, a realization dawned on him. "I saw it near Magnolia Crescent just before I left the Dursleys last summer, after I blew up Aunt Marge and took the night bus to the Leaky Cauldron." "What are you talking about, Harry?" Ron asked, still preoccupied with thoughts of Scabbers and the dog-bitten Malfoy. He looked at Harry incredulously. "A dog from the Muggle world couldn't have followed you all the way to Hogwarts, could it?" "You still don't get it." Harry's face turned pale, and he became suddenly agitated. "How can there be a dog that changes its size, Ron? Have you ever heard of such a magical creature? Unless it's not a dog at all. It's a disguise." "You mean," Harry, Ron began, still not fully grasping the situation. But Hermione gasped, covering her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Professor McGonagall mentioned it in class, an animagus. A heavy silence fell over them, only to be quickly shattered. Who would deliberately disguise themselves as a dog to enter Hogwarts? Harry's green eyes flashed with anger as he declared, "Sirius Black." End of this chapter. Chapter 291. After Harry shouted the name with a voice that nearly echoed like a roar, the reactions of those around him varied. Hermione, her fair cheeks tinged with fear, covered her mouth, yet her eyes, filled with determination, flickered as if she were assessing the plausibility of Harry's theory. Ron, on the other hand, was frozen in shock, stammering, "But this can't be right. The school gate has a Dementor guarding it. There can't be more Dementors at the school gate than at Azkaban, right?" Harry retorted sternly. "But Black still managed to escape from there." "I think you might be a little too nervous, Harry," Hagrid chimed in, offering his perspective. "Black is an animagus? With all due respect, Harry, I might know a bit more about Black than you think. When he attended Hogwarts, I had already been the gamekeeper here for 30 years. And what? I thwarted countless attempts by him and his friends to sneak into the Forbidden Forest." "Just say it straight, Hagrid," Harry interrupted, his face set in a grim expression. "Black's friend was my father, right? And Professor Lupin and Peter Pettigrew, who supposedly died at Black's hands to avenge my parents. It was his betrayal that led to my parents' deaths at the hands of Voldemort." In the dead of night, as the cold wind howled, the mention of Voldemort sent shivers through everyone present. "Sirius Black has been trying to get close to me since he escaped from Azkaban 6 months ago. He wants to kill me to avenge Voldemort." "Where did you hear all this, Harry?" Hagrid asked incredulously, his mouth agape as if he could swallow a dragon egg. He looked at Harry in confusion, then glanced at the silent Hermione and Ron. His voice turned stern. "Don't tell me it's Remus. I know him. He's not one to gossip." Hagrid's questioning made Harry hesitate, but soon the anger and hatred he felt upon hearing the news resurfaced. "I overheard your conversation last term at the Three Broomsticks when you met the Minister for Magic. But," Harry continued, "there's a secret passage in the school that Filch doesn't know about, leading directly to Hogsmeade." As Harry revealed this, Ron desperately signaled him to stop, but Harry ignored him. Seeing Hagrid's surprised expression, Harry felt a thrill of defiance. He was the one who should know everything, yet Hagrid, Professor Lupin, Professor Blaine, and even Headmaster Dumbledore kept him in the dark. He understood they were trying to protect him, fearing he might act recklessly. But did they realize that the couple who died tragically at Voldemort's hands 12 years ago were his parents? "My God!" Hagrid exclaimed, his voice filled with anger, reacting just as Harry had anticipated. "You know Black is still on the run, yet you—" Hagrid slapped his forehead vigorously, trying to regain his composure. "It's so late. Why are the three of you on campus? Harry, even if it's to celebrate today's victory, you've gone too far." Hagrid's face was already grim, and Harry knew that if he mentioned they had ventured out because of a mouse, it might drive Hagrid to fury. So, even in his anger, Harry held his tongue. "Go back to the castle, right now," Hagrid ordered angrily. "I'll discuss the secret passage and Hogsmeade with you tomorrow. I need to bring Malfoy back. That foolish boy ran through the Forbidden Forest with a broomstick in the middle of the night. He probably doesn't know what happened to the last group who tried that." As Hagrid stormed into the room, Hermione pleaded softly with Harry. "Let's go back, Harry. Remember what happened in Professor Blaine's office. Besides, we're not." "But," Ron stammered, clearly bewildered by the unfolding events. He gestured vaguely towards the Forbidden Forest, muttering, "Scabbers and Malfoy." "Are you really going to risk exposing Harry to Black just because of Scabbers?" Hermione retorted sharply. At that moment, Hagrid appeared, clutching a hunting bow with his broken pink umbrella tucked under his arm. Spotting Harry, Ron, and Hermione standing frozen in place, he adopted a rare authoritative tone. "Get back quickly, Harry, and you two as well. Don't make put you all in detention." To everyone's surprise, Harry turned and began to shuffle back. Hermione and Ron exchanged astonished glances, not expecting Harry to comply so easily. Satisfied, Hagrid nodded and turned towards the Forbidden Forest. However, after only a couple of steps, he halted abruptly, realizing a significant problem. He had no idea what that Slytherin kid Malfoy was up to, but he noticed Malfoy clutching a broomstick, pursued by a dog that didn't seem slow. How was he supposed to catch up with them? On foot, by the time he reached Malfoy, the boy might already be in serious trouble. Why weren't their broomsticks designed for giants? Hagrid thought angrily. Though there were tools to speed up his pace, Hagrid had vowed never to use one particular item again. But with a student's life potentially at risk, he had no choice. He quickly moved to the east wall of his house, feeling around until he uncovered a wooden cover hidden beneath dust and weeds. Beneath it lay a snow-white motorcycle, and Hagrid's breathing quickened with anticipation. "I hope you can still move," Hagrid muttered, lifting the motorcycle effortlessly, as if it were a mere toy. A spark of dark blue lightning flickered from the tip of his broken pink umbrella, instantly clearing the dust. He tossed the umbrella and hunting bow into the sidecar and turned his attention to the array of buttons controlling the motorcycle, which he hadn't touched in years. Fortunately, luck was on Hagrid's side. He pressed a switch, and the motorcycle's exhaust pipe belched thick smoke, emitting a sound like a dragon's roar. As Hagrid twisted the handle, the roar intensified. "Where did you get this thing?" someone asked. "I got it from Black," Hagrid replied happily. "You might not remember, Harry, but I used it to take you from Godric's Hollow to your Muggle relative's house 12 years ago on Professor Dumbledore's orders. You were just a little kid then, small enough for me to carry with one hand." "Cool," another voice chimed in reverently. "The Muggle saloon my dad converted was nothing like this." "Hey, Arthur," Hagrid began, adjusting the motorcycle's rearview mirror. But his smile faded when he saw the three young faces reflected behind him. "I think I remember this," Harry said thoughtfully, climbing into the sidecar. He squeezed in next to Hagrid, as the motorcycle could barely accommodate one person alongside Hagrid's massive frame. Hermione tossed the invisibility cloak to Harry and awkwardly climbed into the sidecar, clutching Hagrid's umbrella and hunting bow. Ron, brimming with excitement, grabbed the folds of Hagrid's coat and perched on the seat. "You three," Hagrid finally roared, exasperated. "Have you decided to ignore everything I say?" End of this chapter. Chapter 292, Old Acquaintance. Facing Hagrid's fury, Harry stood his ground, meeting Hagrid's gaze with a determined expression. "We just want to help you find Malfoy, Hagrid," he insisted. "Oh, come on, Harry," Hagrid retorted, cutting through Harry's intentions with brutal honesty. "You already know the truth. You're just looking to get revenge on Black. It's pure fantasy. I've never heard of that traitor being an animagus. If he were, Rhyme Stewart would know, and he wouldn't keep it from Professor Dumbledore." "Then what are you worried about?" Harry quickly countered. "What am I worried about?" Hagrid exclaimed, exasperated by Harry's stubbornness. His black, beetle-like eyes blazed with frustration. Just as he was about to continue, Hermione interjected, her voice clear and urgent. "Malfoy may be in danger, Hagrid. You should get him back quickly." Realizing that his authoritative demeanor was ineffective against these three determined students, Hagrid conceded. As Hermione pointed out, the priority was to find Malfoy, who had ventured into the Forbidden Forest. As for the mysterious dog, Hagrid still believed it to be a magical creature with extraordinary abilities. "All right," Hagrid grumbled, casting a glance at Harry's invisibility cloak. "But don't think this is over. Once I find Malfoy, the four of you will be in detention together." Though the thought of being confined with Malfoy was unpleasant, Hagrid finally agreed to let them accompany him into the Forbidden Forest. This was only the second time Harry had ventured there since starting at Hogwarts. The first time, they had encountered Voldemort lurking in the woods. "We won't run into him tonight, will we?" Harry muttered under his breath, but his words were lost in the roar that shattered the night's silence. Hagrid's motorcycle roared to life, spewing brilliant blue and white flames as it soared 30 feet into the air, swiftly carrying them into the depths of the Forbidden Forest. Not long after they vanished, a figure hurried towards the castle, scrutinizing a piece of parchment in his hand. Finding nothing, he looked up, scanning the surroundings until his gaze settled on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Spotting Fang, he asked, "They went in, right?" Recognizing the newcomer, Fang ceased its low growls and nodded. With confirmation, the figure strode purposefully into the forest. Suddenly, the treetops at the forest's edge rustled, as if disturbed by a flock of birds taking flight. A mass of dark clouds swept into the forest, shrouded by the night. "It's coming soon. We have to wait." A suppressed, trembling voice whispered from the vegetable garden on the small slope. In late January, the breeze on the Hogwarts campus hinted at spring, but the forbidden forest at midnight was a different world. The air was thick with cold moisture, and as they flew over the narrow path, they encountered patches of eerie, white mist. Each time they passed through, Hermione let out a startled gasp. "I should have brought a scarf," Ron complained, shivering. 10 minutes into the forest, the thrill of their nighttime adventure, tracking a dog that might be Sirius Black and hoping to send Malfoy to detention, had faded. The forest's strange howls set their nerves on edge. Ron shivered, his hair and eyebrows frosted, relying on the warmth of his friends to keep moving forward. Atticus Blaine nestled into the warmth of Hagrid's moleskin coat as they sped through the forest. The tangled, clawed vines and the ghostly scars on the old tree stumps made Hermione shiver. She clung to Harry's sleeve, leaving damp marks from her sweaty palms. The darkness of the forbidden forest seemed to swallow all light, whether it was the moon and stars above or the motorcycle's headlights below. Visibility was poor, forcing Hagrid to squint as he navigated the soft, leafy ground. "I was just thinking, Hagrid," Harry shouted, his voice barely rising above the roar of the exhaust. "The day before school started, when I was flying the firebolt on the playground, I ran into Black. He didn't act then, maybe because he feared exposure to the Dementors. He might not have found a chance to sneak into the castle this week. But why is he chasing Malfoy tonight?" "I don't know, Harry," Hagrid replied, his focus on the blurred footprints ahead. "I've heard rumors that Malfoy's father was a Death Eater, but after Voldemort's fall, he pretended he had nothing to do with him. Do you think this might have angered Black, who was loyal to Voldemort, and now he wants revenge on Malfoy?" "If that's the case," Ron panted, "shouldn't we slow down a bit, at least until Malfoy's finished?" "Don't say that name," Hagrid growled, "or I'll put you down and let you run behind the motorcycle. This old bike's struggling to carry 4 people as it is." Hagrid dismissed the idea that the large dog was Black, which frustrated Harry. "Oh, look over there!" Hermione suddenly released Harry's arm, pointing to the right side of the increasingly obscure path. The others followed her gaze. In the direction she pointed, shadowy flames flickered, and Harry felt several eyes watching them. "Ah, old friends, we can ask them for directions," Hagrid said cheerfully, recognizing the torchbearers. As they approached, Harry realized they were centaurs, whom he had encountered during his first year in the Forbidden Forest. About 20 centaurs stood before them, holding torches and spears, their faces stern even at the sight of Hagrid. The 3 leading centaurs were the strongest, their arm muscles as thick as Hermione's waist. Harry recognized these formidable centaurs. "Is there a war going on here?" Hagrid asked, landing the motorcycle and noting the centaur's tense stance. Hagrid, respected for his help with the magical creatures of the Forbidden Forest, was met with a warning glance from the centaur on the left. This centaur, with platinum hair and the body of a silver-maned horse, stepped forward. "Good evening, Hagrid," Firenze said, then looked down at Harry with a serious expression. "Good evening, Harry Potter. We meet again," said Atticus Blaine with a smile. "Long time no see, Firenze," Harry replied. As he stepped out of the car, Harry realized just how much the chill of the Forbidden Forest had affected him. He rubbed his aching knee vigorously, attempting to force a smile onto his stiff, numb face. While Firenze and Harry reminisced about old times, Hagrid cast a wary glance at the heavily armed centaurs surrounding them. Turning to Ronan and Bane, he asked, "What on earth is going on? Are you planning to attack Hogwarts?" End of this chapter. Chapter 293. The only sound was the crackling of the burning torches, casting flickering shadows in the silence. "Are they really planning to start a war against wizards?" Hermione whispered, her voice barely audible. She had read in some books that centaurs harbored an unfriendly attitude towards wizards, often rejecting any contact with them. The centaurs remained silent, not answering Hagrid's question. Hermione's whispered inquiry made Harry's heart skip a beat. He glanced at Firenze, the centaur he admired for his kindness and willingness to help wizards, unlike his brethren, such as Bane. Firenze had once saved Harry, and now, amidst the serious talk of war, even the matter of Black seemed less pressing. Harry looked into Firenze's eyes, hoping for a response. "Just like before, Harry Potter," Firenze said slowly, gazing up at the moon. "You chose a bright night of Mars to enter the Forbidden Forest again. It is unwise. We do not wish for wizards to interfere in the affairs of the centaurs." "War?" Harry, Hermione, and Ron exclaimed in unison. Hagrid immediately rolled up his sleeves, towering over the strong Bane and Ronan. He stood before the two centaur leaders with a fierce glare, his actions provoking Bane's strong displeasure. "We have nothing against the students at Hogwarts, Hagrid," Bane retorted. "Then who exactly are you gathering your forces against in the middle of the night?" Hagrid narrowed his eyes. "Is it the sons of Aragog causing you trouble again? I've already spoken to him about it." "Who is Aragog?" Ron whispered to Harry. When Harry shook his head, Ron turned to Hermione. "Is there a book with that name in it, Hermione?" The Forbidden Forest was a world apart from the wizarding realm. Renowned figures outside held no sway here, and some of the forest's overlords were unknown to the outside world. Hagrid was the sole bridge of communication between these two worlds. "Take it easy, Hagrid," Firenze said calmly, turning his head. "We merely wish to punish those despicable dark creatures dwelling in the depths of the Forbidden Forest. They have been overly active lately, encroaching upon our territory. This evening, they even dared to kidnap one of our own." "You mean?" Hagrid began, frowning. He was about to name the creatures, but hesitated when he noticed Harry, Ron, and Hermione's keen interest. After a brief pause, he continued firmly, "If that's the case, your actions are understandable. However, Dumbledore hopes for a harmonious and peaceful coexistence among the magical creatures in the Forbidden Forest. If they truly did this, I will report it, Firenze. Professor Dumbledore will intervene on your behalf, but for now. The centaurs do not need the protection of wizards," Bane interrupted, his anger flaring. "Not even from Dumbledore." As tensions rose, Ronan uneasily pawed the ground with his hooves, stepping forward to stand between Bane and Hagrid. "Hagrid means well, Bane," Ronan said, trying to defuse the situation. He then turned to Hagrid. "We can handle this ourselves." "You should respect the rights of the centaurs, Hagrid," Firenze added, patting Bane's back before returning to the front of his group. He looked at the bewildered Harry once more. "I believe we all have important matters to attend to, Harry Potter. Now, it's time to part." The torches quickly vanished among the trees, and darkness enveloped Harry and his friends. The cold air swirled around them as Hagrid approached his motorcycle. After fumbling for a moment, he switched on the headlights, casting a beam of light into the cylindrical gloom. If the same kind were taken away, then it's no wonder Ronan and the others are mobilizing their troops, Hagrid said, frowning as he fiddled with his beard. "The number of centaurs is very small, and each one is precious to them." Harry nodded sympathetically. He suddenly recalled that last summer, Professor Atticus Blaine had taken him to the underground world deep in Nocturne Alley. It was a place that challenged his understanding of the magical world. Harry had witnessed a group of dark wizards illegally trading magical creatures, including a centaur. Perhaps that centaur belonged to Firenze's group. "Hagrid, what on earth has kidnapped the centaurs?" Hermione asked, her delicate eyebrows furrowed in thought. "And it's too coincidental. Tonight, the centaur tribe was attacked, and Malfoy somehow broke into the Forbidden Forest, that dog." "Yeah, it's really lively tonight," Hagrid said, clearly distraught. "I should report these things to Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine immediately, but they're not at the school." Hagrid's words left Harry, Ron, and Hermione puzzled. "It might be a conspiracy, Harry," Ron said, his face pale as Hagrid struggled to get on the motorcycle. "Someone must be up to something, and I've never understood why Scabbers would willingly follow Malfoy. I think we should go back to school and tell Professor McGonagall everything, Harry," Hermione said seriously. Harry didn't speak, but he expressed his agreement through action. As the motorcycle roared to life again, he climbed into the sidecar. Beneath his eyelashes, dusted with crushed ice, his eyes were resolute. They retraced their path, the terrain now more complex than the flat, leaf-strewn ground they had initially traversed. Puddles, mud, and peculiar rocks appeared frequently, making it difficult to track footprints and slowing their progress. The three young wizards lit their wands, assisting Hagrid in the search. So far, they hadn't heard a single human voice, which might be a good sign. Malfoy was certainly no match for Black, but Harry thought he might at least manage a few screams before meeting his end. Riding the motorcycle this time, Hagrid's demeanor was much more serious, urgency evident in his every move. Originally, his mission had been to find a whimsical young wizard practicing flying skills in the Forbidden Forest at night. Now, he needed to hurry and check on the centaurs. The presence of werewolves in the Forbidden Forest was a mere school legend among young wizards, but both Dumbledore and Hagrid knew the truth. If a war broke out between the centaurs and werewolves, and Hogwarts became involved, the thought alone made Hagrid's stomach churn. After flying for another 10 minutes, the dense forest vegetation forced Hagrid to stop the motorcycle. The four of them continued on foot. As they walked, the dog's paw prints on the ground became erratic, suggesting the creature had exhausted much of its energy. Hagrid also noticed crushed marks on a tree trunk, evidence of a curse. "Malfoy did it, right?" Ron asked, his voice trembling. No one answered, not even Harry or Hermione. The late-night chill had hardened the wet ground, and each step on the frost-covered branches and leaves produced a crackling sound that pierced the quiet forest, heightening their anxiety. "Harry," Hermione called softly. To avoid missing any clues, they spread out in a fan shape through the woods. Just as Harry, who was standing on the far left, Atticus Blaine was struggling with the marks on the ground. Suddenly, Hermione, who was on the far right, spoke, her voice filled with panic and helplessness. Harry immediately sensed something was wrong. He quickly raised his head, pointing his wand in the direction Hermione was facing. With just one glance, it felt as if a cold, heavy hand was gripping his stomach, causing pain and nausea to torment his nerves. Ron appeared as though he was about to faint, while Hagrid stood beside Hermione like a wooden statue, unable to move. The cold moonlight illuminated a rare clearing in the forest. The liquid pooled in the depressions on the ground reflected the moonlight, giving it a silvery appearance. Was it mixed with ice, water, or blood? A man with a broom had fallen into a pothole, and beside him, another man with disheveled hair was searching his body. Malfoy had always been the one Harry despised most among the young wizards. Yet, seeing Malfoy's body lying weakly on the ground, Harry found himself at a loss for words to describe his feelings. He knew, however, that the look he now directed at the crouching wizard was anything but grateful. End of this chapter. Chapter 294. Those Hates. The man standing next to Malfoy rose slowly, turning to face Hagrid and Harry, who were several dozen feet away. His body visibly trembled, and he instinctively wanted to flee. However, he merely staggered back a step. High above, the clouds drifted with the wind, obscuring the cold moonlight. On the ground, a shadow crept silently from the other side of the hillside, enveloping Harry, the others, and the man. The two groups stared at each other in the darkness, neither making a move, yet a trace of murderous intent lingered in the misty air. The eerie silence stretched on until the reluctant clouds in the night sky shifted, allowing the moonlight to cast a pale glow over everything, breaking the stillness. "I thought it was only Hagrid. How did you three end up here?" Sirius said, his expression complex. Harry had imagined countless times how he would react upon finally seeing Sirius Black. He envisioned himself charging forward to confront the traitor, not stopping until one of them lay defeated. Yet, Professor Blaine's teachings had instilled in him the understanding that if this murderer truly appeared, defeating him would be unlikely, and even mustering the courage to face him would be a challenge. The prudent course was to remain in the castle, within sight of others, avoiding danger. If he did encounter Black, he should try to escape, for if Black had no mercy for the friendship with Harry's father, he would show none to Harry. Despite Professor Blaine's advice today, as Harry faced the man responsible for making him an orphan and subjecting him to the Dursleys' cruelty for 11 years, he couldn't convince himself to hide behind Hagrid. He expected to see a man resembling the wanted poster, a gaunt, tormented, insane criminal in tattered prison garb. But the man before him was not as he imagined. His gray eyes were bright, his cheeks thin but healthy-looking, and he wore a robe, not a ragged piece of trash, but a well-fitted, expensive garment that shimmered in the moonlight. In that robe, Sirius Black appeared as a normal, even elegant wizard. He still has time to find himself a beautiful dress? Harry thought incredulously. He assumed that wherever Sirius Black was hiding, he must be in constant panic, a fitting retribution for a dark wizard who betrayed his friend and followed Voldemort. But Harry's vision blurred momentarily, not from fatigue, but from the hot rush of blood to his forehead, rendering him momentarily unconscious. Yet, without his brain's command, his body faithfully acted on the desire welling up in his soul, and he raised his wand. "Professor Blaine, you have made a mistake in judging me." Before he could utter the most powerful spell he knew, a thought flashed through Harry's mind, and then, "Canridi Leviosa," he roared. From the quiver in Hermione's arms, an arrow suddenly flew up. Under the cover of darkness, the sharp arrow sliced through the air like cold electricity, appearing instantly before Sirius Black's eyes. Boom! As Sirius swung his wand down, summoning an armored barrier, a string of brilliant, shrill sparks illuminated the forbidden forest, followed by the sound of the barrier shattering. "That's a good move, Harry. You almost took my life," Sirius said, panting slightly, his gaze on Harry filled with complexity. "Of course, I'm not surprised you would do that," Atticus Blaine muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Don't say my name, scum! You don't deserve it," Harry shouted, stepping forward with his wand raised, his only desire to get close to Black and end him, even if it meant getting badly wounded or worse. But as he took a step, he found himself immobilized. Hagrid, standing beside him, had reached out and pulled him back, while Hermione and Ron clung to his waist and arm, desperately trying to restrain him. "Don't be impulsive, Harry. Leave it to Hagrid," Hermione screamed, her voice filled with urgency. "He killed my parents," Harry growled, still struggling to break free. "Don't let this guy stain your hands, Harry. Let me handle it," Hagrid said, stepping forward to shield Harry, Ron, and Hermione, spreading his arms wide like a protective hen. As Hagrid and the others held Harry back, Sirius stood with his hands at his sides, adopting no defensive stance, his expression one of deep sorrow. "When Harry mentioned the dog could be you, I thought it was just a child's whim," Hagrid said, his eyes widening with realization. His entire demeanor turned fierce as he glared at Sirius, as if ready to tear him apart. "You're quite the master of disguise, you despicable traitor. I bet no one knows you're an illegal animagus, right?" "Actually, quite a few people know," Sirius replied with a sigh, attempting to explain, but Hagrid's sudden growl interrupted him. "What did you do to that little wizard? He's dead," Hagrid roared. "Calm down, Hagrid," Sirius said, frowning. "The kid named Malfoy just fainted, not dead." "Yes," Hagrid, though relieved to hear Malfoy was alive, maintained his stern tone. "This isn't like you, Black. When did you learn to show mercy? Did Azkaban soften your heart?" "Let me explain, Hagrid," Sirius said, his forehead veins bulging, clearly affected by Hagrid's words. "Explain?" Hagrid bellowed, shoving Harry, Ron, and Hermione to the ground with a forceful push. His black eyes blazed with anger as he charged at Sirius like an enraged troll. "You should explain, Black, but not to me, to James and Lily." "Wait, Hagrid, stop and listen to me," Sirius pleaded, retreating as the 12-foot-tall giant bore down on him with an overwhelming sense of menace. In a blink, Hagrid had closed the distance, his massive hand poised to strike. Before Sirius could clarify the situation, his priority was survival. "Stop it, Hagrid!" Two voices suddenly rang out from the woods, cutting through the tense atmosphere. Sirius's stun spell bounced harmlessly off Hagrid's skin, and a thin rope shot out from the shadows, binding Hagrid's legs and causing him to lose balance and crash heavily to the ground. End of this chapter. Chapter 295. In the darkness, bound by the ropes, Hagrid, who was just a step away from Sirius, fell to the ground, causing the earth to tremble momentarily. Harry reacted instantly, turning around and directing his wand towards the source of the ropes in the dark. Ron and Hermione were slightly slower to respond, but they followed suit. Relief washed over them as the familiar contours of a face emerged from the shadows. It was Professor Lupin. His face was pale, and he was out of breath, having evidently chased them on foot. Professor Lupin, Hagrid was dealing with Sirius. Harry's angry outburst was cut short as Professor Lupin gestured for silence. This puzzled Harry. Sirius had killed his parents and was also a good friend of Professor Lupin. Why did Lupin's face show nothing but exhaustion? Hermione seemed to have realized something, covering her mouth as her expression turned to one of fear. "Hey!" The ropes conjured by Professor Lupin proved effective. Hagrid moved and sat up, pushing against the ground with his palms. Although a few strands of the rope snapped, the broken ends twisted in the air and repaired themselves. Unable to stand, Hagrid glared at Professor Lupin as he passed by. "Your magic is much worse than Atticus Blaine's, Remus. You accidentally injured me." "Be quiet, Hagrid," Remus replied, his hair disheveled and sticking to his damp forehead. He walked past Hagrid and approached Sirius, who had fallen to the ground to avoid his stunning spell, exchanging a look with him. Everyone's eyes were on Professor Lupin, including Harry's, but his gaze was vacant, and he felt his strength ebbing away. His spell had failed to harm Black, and now with Hagrid and Professor Lupin present, Sirius Black was doomed. He would be handed over to the Dementors, and for the rest of his life, this despicable criminal would continue to live. Perhaps one day, when Voldemort returned to the wizarding world, he would find a way to rescue his loyal follower. Harry's revenge had failed. What happened to Mr. Malfoy? Contrary to their expectations, Lupin didn't immediately restrain Black, but instead showed concern for Draco Malfoy, who lay unconscious on the ground. This was understandable. Lupin was a professor, after all, and cared about the well-being of his students. However, it was Sirius Black standing before him. Hagrid was confused, Harry puzzled, and Ron oblivious to anything amiss. Only Hermione's eyes widened in horror. "I didn't touch him. He fainted on his own," Lupin said, squatting down to examine Malfoy's eyes with the light of his wand. After a moment, he spoke gravely. "Probably the Imperious Curse." "Imperious Curse? What is that spell?" Harry felt as if his brain had rusted, unable to comprehend the scene unfolding before him. "I think so too," Sirius said, standing up and looking down at Malfoy with a pale face. "Also, it seems this little guy has been under control for a long time. It's strange that no one noticed." Suddenly, Sirius frowned, recalling Atticus Blaine's abrupt behavior when he had seen Draco Malfoy in the office earlier. "What happened?" Remus asked, alert. "Nothing," Sirius replied, shaking his head slowly. He wasn't sure if Atticus had noticed something wrong with Malfoy, and besides, such matters were not important now. "Speaking of which, how did you realize something was wrong?" Sirius asked in return. "Thanks to our little invention and creation," Remus said, a shadow passing over his eyes as he glanced at Harry and the others. The atmosphere became tense. Everyone instinctively turned towards the source of the sound, their eyes wide with apprehension. The oppressive silence of the Forbidden Forest was shattered by the eerie howl, and the group felt a chill run down their spines. Atticus Blaine, who had been quietly observing the unfolding drama, finally spoke up. "We need to stay calm and stick together," he advised, his voice steady despite the tension. "There's more at play here than meets the eye." Sirius, still visibly agitated, nodded in agreement. "Atticus is right. We can't let fear cloud our judgment. We need to focus on finding Peter before he escapes." Harry, though still grappling with the revelations, felt a flicker of hope. "If what you're saying is true, then we have to stop him," he said, determination replacing the confusion in his eyes. Hermione, though skeptical, couldn't ignore the sincerity in Remus's voice. "But how do we know you're telling the truth?" she questioned, her voice tinged with doubt. Remus, maintaining his composure, replied, "I understand your skepticism, Hermione, but I assure you, everything I've said is true. We have to act quickly before Peter slips away." Hagrid, who had been listening intently, finally spoke up. "If there's a chance to clear Sirius's name, we have to take it," he said, his voice booming with conviction. The group, now united by a common goal, prepared to confront the danger lurking in the shadows. The tension in the air was palpable, but with Atticus's guidance, they felt a renewed sense of purpose. As they moved cautiously through the forest, the oppressive silence returned, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. Each step brought them closer to the truth, and with it, the hope of justice for Sirius and the memory of Harry's parents. In the heart of the Forbidden Forest, under the watchful eyes of the ancient trees, the group pressed on, determined to uncover the truth and bring Peter Pettigrew to justice. Remus and Sirius simultaneously cast their spells, their wands emitting a brilliant light. As if guided by an unseen force, a wand soared into the sky, tracing a graceful arc before landing perfectly in the hand of someone descending from the tall tree trunk. The onlookers gasped in surprise as a familiar voice pierced the silence. "It's one of those rare moments when you're clear-headed, Mr. Weasley." Emerging from the shadows was a figure with a sullen expression and eyes filled with intense loathing. "I've had enough of your nonsense. Werewolf." End of this chapter. Chapter 296. Unacceptable. The series of unexpected events left Harry utterly bewildered. First, Professor Lupin appeared out of nowhere with the Marauder's map. He wasn't there to capture Black, but to assist him. Then, Lupin shared tales that seemed as fantastical as the Arabian Nights. Sirius Black was not the murderer of Harry's parents. The true culprit was Peter Pettigrew, who had been awarded the Order of Merlin by the Ministry of Magic. Pettigrew had transformed into a rat and lived with the Weasley family for over a decade as Ron's pet. If this was true, Harry felt a chill run down his spine. He had unknowingly spent 3 years in the company of his parents' murderer, even helping Ron care for Scabbers. Such revelations were hard to accept, not just for Ron, but for Harry as well. Now, Professor Snape, whom Harry despised the most, had also appeared. He seemed to harbor a deep-seated animosity towards both Black and Lupin. Snape confiscated their wands, incapacitated Lupin, and finally aimed his wand at Black. His eyes were filled with a murderous intent, as if he could end Black's life at any moment. Harry couldn't discern who bore the deeper grudge, Snape or Black, as they glared at each other. "Speak up," Snape demanded, his face ashen, pressing his wand against Black's forehead. Each word dripped with venomous resentment. "Tell me, is the werewolf lying on the ground spinning lies, Black? Just say it, and I promise to make it quick for you. Speak, Black." Snape's dark eyes burned with a terrifying intensity, his final words emerging as a growl. In the chilling forest, a faint sigh was lost amidst the rustling leaves, unnoticed by all. Perhaps in the next moment Sirius would meet his end, yet he showed no fear. Instead, he grinned, his voice slightly hoarse. "You're still joking, Severus. You haven't changed a bit over the years." Since Harry had joined the school over 3 years ago, he had mostly seen Professor Snape with two expressions, his usual sallow complexion and the livid hue he wore when confronting Harry. But tonight, after Sirius spoke, Harry witnessed an unusual flush on Snape's face. Anyone observing could tell that Snape's sanity was teetering on the brink. Harry didn't want Snape to kill Black, at least not now. Lupin trusted Black, and Professor Lupin himself was deeply trusted by both Professor Dumbledore and Professor Atticus Blaine. If Lupin was wrong about Black, it would mean that both Dumbledore and Blaine had misplaced their trust. "Professor Snape, please, listen," Harry implored. "I mean, Professor Lupin just mentioned last Halloween. It wouldn't hurt to hear the rest, would it?" Hermione, clearly in agreement with Harry, glanced fearfully at Remus on the ground and spoke in a timid voice. If it's true, silence, you foolish girl!" Snape snapped, suddenly agitated. "Don't speak of things you don't understand." "Severus," Lupin, lying on the ground, spoke with a sorrowful expression. "You know the truth, Severus. You just refuse to face it." "Shut up, werewolf," Snape barked, a few sparks shooting from his wand's tip. Sirius instinctively flinched, but Snape held his collar tightly, growling, "Truth or not, Black, you deserve death." At these words, Sirius, who had maintained a defiant demeanor, suddenly froze, and then Atticus Blaine's face turned somber as he shifted his gaze to Harry. The guilt etched on his features made it hard for Harry to believe that everything Professor Lupin had just revealed was true. Ron, still in shock, shook his head and muttered incoherently, clearly devastated by the revelation that Scabbers was a murderer. "Whether it's true or not, Severus." Hagrid was the first to regain his composure. He frowned at Professor Snape and said, "This should be judged by Professor Dumbledore, Severus. In this situation, I think it's possible for Black to live a little longer." Snape remained unmoved, his eyes filled with hatred as he glared at Black. "You want me dead? I'm fine with that, Snivellus," Sirius said calmly after taking a deep breath. Wring his gaze away from Harry's face, which so closely resembled James. "But that rat Peter shouldn't have gotten far. If we don't catch him tonight, he might escape for good. Snape's cheek twitched, but he didn't release his grip on Sirius's collar. Severus, Lupin, half kneeling on the ground, spoke warily. You don't have to trust us, but surely you trust Atticus, right? Atticus? Snape's eyes flickered momentarily. Lupin hadn't mentioned Atticus in his earlier explanation. What did this have to do with him? You interrupted before I could finish, Lupin continued, meeting Snape's gaze. Before Christmas, Atticus captured Sirius. He examined Sirius's memories and confirmed that Peter was the one who betrayed James and Lily. That's why he decided to keep the matter quiet. You might have noticed a black cat named Lenny with Atticus before. That was Sirius. In the darkness, Harry's mouth fell open. He glanced at Hermione, who mirrored his expression, as if they were both under a petrification spell. It's a lie, Snape muttered, his eyes clouded, a result of his occlumency defenses. You know Dumbledore and Atticus have both left the school, and you're trying to help this scum escape, aren't you? I can read your mind, Lupin. If you truly see through me, Severus, Lupin replied, unwavering, then you should know that everything I've said is true. End of this chapter. Chapter 297, The Wolves. Atticus Blaine stood high above, his arms folded as the wind played with his hair. A few strands of gray fell across his eyes, but they couldn't obscure his intense gaze fixed on Professor Snape. Atticus understood the turmoil within Snape's heart. The man lived for hatred and protection, and now half of the reasons that sustained him were crumbling. It was a cruel reality. Atticus had anticipated the possibility of Snape discovering the truth, yet he insisted that Snape witness everything firsthand. It was only fair. As Atticus looked up at the night sky, the moon, hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, cast a blood-red glow. He frowned. The moon was nearly full. Peter, hiding in a tree hollow 200 feet away, shivered when he realized Atticus knew of Sirius's innocence. He needed to escape immediately. Just as he was about to peek out, a swift, short gust of wind rustled the leaves, prompting Peter to retreat further into the shadows to avoid detection under the moonlight. Tonight, Harry, Ron, and Hermione ventured into the Forbidden Forest. Who had alerted them? Remus Lupin followed, clutching a copy of the Marauders map. That was odd. Peter didn't recall them having two copies. And then there was Severus Snape. They all converged in the Forbidden Forest as if by some unspoken agreement. This was entirely outside Peter's plan, and now they all knew the truth of that fateful year. From the darkness of the tree hollow, two intense beams of light pierced through, revealing Peter's resolve. He could no longer return to being the little boy of the Weasley family. Now, he would see how effective his preparations had been. Snape pointed his wand at Sirius's forehead, but his trembling wrist betrayed his inner conflict. Time seemed to freeze. After Lupin mentioned Atticus's name, he fell silent, and Harry, Ron, and Hermione were reduced to mere spectators, unable to intervene. Under the night sky, Sirius and Snape's eyes met, their gazes less filled with hatred and more with confusion. Both men, now in their 30s, pondered the question, what is right and what is wrong? It's time to end this, Severus, Lupin said. Let's return to the castle together, call Albus and Atticus back, and we'll sort everything out. Was it truly time to end? Harry looked disheartened, wanting to ask about Peter, but he remained silent. You take Draco, Hagrid. Snape's voice was hoarse, as if recovering from a week-long fever. His complexion returned to its usual sallow hue, but his eyes, locked on Sirius, revealed that the killing intent hadn't entirely dissipated. He was trying to restrain himself. Hagrid glanced at Harry, sighed heavily, and approached Lupin. With ease, he tore off the ropes binding Lupin's hands and feet, signifying his belief in Sirius's innocence. Yet, he still growled at Sirius. You've got a lot to explain, boy. With that, Hagrid bent down, slipped his thick palm under the neck and waist of the unconscious Draco, and lifted him effortlessly. At that moment, something fell from Draco's pocket, slowly landing on the ground and capturing everyone's attention. It was the Marauders map. Lupin, standing nearby, was stunned. He stared at the map on the ground for a few seconds before reaching into his wizard robe and pulling out another map. How could there be? Sirius noticed the anomaly and asked instinctively, but the question hung in the air, unanswered. The sudden mutation interrupted Atticus Blaine's words. The map in Remus's hand slipped away, floating into the air, while the one on the ground mirrored its movement. in the astonished eyes of everyone present, the two maps began to orbit each other like supernovas drawn together by an unseen force. The central point spun rapidly, its speed increasing from a gentle twirl to a dizzying whirl. A strange breeze swirled around them, and within seconds, all that remained visible was a vortex of energy. A burst of golden red light erupted, illuminating the forbidden forest in a moment of breathtaking splendor. The violent wind, a byproduct of the powerful spell, sent Lupin and Sirius tumbling backward. Hagrid staggered, shielding his eyes with his massive arms, while Snape, with quick reflexes, conjured a barrier to protect himself. Only Harry, Ron, and Hermione, standing at a distance, were spared the immediate chaos. As the brilliant light gradually faded, only one Marauder's map remained where there had been two. Atticus Blaine, hovering above, wore a perplexed expression. How many maps were there now? 1, 2, or 3? He pondered whether such a phenomenon would occur if a wizard encountered their past self during time travel. Suddenly, a pained cry echoed from the depths of the forest. Snape, wary of Sirius seizing the opportunity to escape, froze and immediately pointed his wand in the direction of the sound. The others were still reeling from the magical explosion caused by the fusion of the Marauders' maps. "Are you all right, Ron? Hermione?" Harry asked, quickly getting to his feet and rushing to help his friends. "Oh, my bum hurts," Ron grumbled, rubbing the sore spot. "Harry, did you know there were two Marauders' maps? Fred and George never mentioned that." Harry hesitated, staring at the parchment beneath Snape's feet. "I had no idea," he admitted. "Don't be silly, you two," Hermione whispered, biting her lower lip. She, too, was fixated on the parchment, her expression bewildered. When no one was watching, she discreetly touched the small funnel hidden beneath her shirt, her expression growing more serious. Sirius and Lupin, having regained their footing, limped back toward the group. They noticed Snape's guarded stance and exchanged puzzled glances. As seasoned wizards who had survived the war years, they were now acutely aware of the cold mist creeping in from all directions. "Severus," Lupin said, plucking a damp leaf from his face and extending his hand to Snape. "I need my wand back. Surely you have no objections?" "You three, come here," Hagrid bellowed at Harry, Ron, and Hermione, who were still trying to make sense of the situation. "Now's not the time to dawdle." "What's going on, Hagrid?" Harry, Hermione, and Ron asked in unison as they approached. Hagrid, holding Malfoy under his arm, ushered them behind him and retrieved the hunting bow from Hermione's grasp. "We were ambushed," Sirius stated gravely, his eyes scanning the darkness. Without his wand, he was forced to confront the encroaching shadows with only his bare hands. Harry glanced at him but remained silent. Sirius had yet to earn his trust. Hagrid deposited Malfoy into the protective circle formed by the adult wizards, who stood back to back. Harry and Ron reluctantly took hold of Malfoy's arms, their expressions filled with disdain. "Who would attack us, Hagrid?" Hermione's voice trembled, her cheeks pale with fear. "Could it be the centaurs?" "I'm afraid not, Miss Granger," Lupin replied with a hint of bitterness. "It's a creature far more dangerous and malevolent than a centaur." As the wind rustled through the trees, scattering leaves across the ground, a mocking voice echoed from the depths of the desolate, forbidden forest. "How ironic to hear that coming from you," it taunted. Emerging from the shadows, a man with a tangled beard and repulsive yellow teeth, reeking of blood, slowly stepped into the dim, cold light. "My friend Remus," he sneered. End of this chapter. Chapter 298, Choice Professor Lupine's Friend? Harry froze for a moment. He instinctively wanted to glance at Lupin, but as his eyes shifted, he caught a glimpse of Ron and Hermione's expressions. They both looked as if they had seen a ghost, their breath seemingly caught in their throats. "What's going on? Do you know this guy?" Harry asked, his voice tinged with confusion. "He is Greyback, the leader of the werewolves. I've seen his wanted photos in the Ministry of Magic's book," Hermione replied, her voice trembling as much as her body. "A notorious criminal?" Harry thought instinctively. Judging by Ron's terrified expression, it seemed more complicated than that. "Don't tell me you don't know Greyback, Harry," Ron said coldly, not daring to look at the man. He kept his gaze fixed on the ground. "Greyback is particularly cruel. He targets underage children, not to eat them, but to turn them into werewolves by biting them. He uses this method to expand his power." Harry froze, turned into a werewolf? A chill ran from his stomach to his forehead, and in an instant, cold sweat dotted his brow. He couldn't imagine what would happen if he were turned into a werewolf. The Dursleys would never let him stay. He would be forced to wander the world. As Ron said, Professor Lupin added bitterly, his back turned to them, "That's how I became a werewolf." "What do you want, Greyback?" Hagrid roared angrily. "Warning Hogwarts and the Centaurs at the same time? You know, if you dare to do this, Dumbledore will not let you go." "Oh, why do you think so?" Greyback's voice was smooth, but his eyes remained cold. "We're very sensible, aren't we, Hagrid? Over the years, we haven't harmed those little fools who sneaked into the Forbidden Forest, nor have we meddled with the Centaurs. Werewolves have always been good neighbors, haven't they?" Lupin took a deep breath, his face cold as he asked, "Then what is the purpose of your presence here tonight, Greyback?" "People who betray their own kind are not qualified to talk to me," Greyback snorted contemptuously, casting a malicious glance at Lupin with his eyes, which gleamed with vertical pupils. "State your purpose, Greyback," Snape interjected in a low, dangerous tone that even Harry and his friends could sense. "You've been doing pretty well under Old Man Dumbledore's protection all these years, Severus," Greyback sneered, seemingly oblivious to Snape's hostility. "And we've been hiding, constantly pursued by the Ministry of Magic. Why haven't you thought of taking care of your old friends, Severus? After all, we've worked together before." Harry couldn't help but shoot Snape a look of disgust. Rumors had circulated at school that Snape was once Voldemort's minion, and now those rumors seemed confirmed. "Either make it clear or get out of here, Greyback," Hagrid growled, his voice low and menacing. Surrounded by a large group of werewolves, it was impossible not to feel nervous, especially with Harry and the others present. If these young wizards were injured tonight, the criticism Dumbledore and Hogwarts would face would be unimaginable. Hagrid's imposing 12-foot-tall frame added an unusual deterrent, causing Greyback to slightly restrain his posture. He smiled coldly. "An old friend wrote us a letter saying that tonight we would meet someone we've been eagerly anticipating," Greyback said. "Greg looking for Blaine?" This thought instinctively popped into Harry's head, but he quickly realized something was amiss. The person who wrote the letter definitely had malicious intentions. "Maybe Scabbers," Hermione whispered quietly. As the situation unfolded, it was clear that the situation had spiraled completely out of the young wizard's control. Harry, Hermione, and Ron could only remain quietly within the protective circle, anxiously observing the unfolding events. "I believe we've been deceived." Greyback's voice was icy. "I led my pack to search the area, but we didn't find our intended target. Instead, we stumbled upon quite the spectacle." Lupin was about to interject, but Greyback's gaze shifted sharply to Sirius, continuing, "Perhaps this is a gift from a benevolent soul. You see, life as a werewolf is challenging, and opportunities to earn 50,000 gold galleons are rare." Sirius was momentarily taken aback, but his eyes soon burned with a fierce intensity. "Werewolves don't wish to be enemies of Hogwarts, Hagrid," Greyback stated, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. He gestured to the werewolves lurking in the shadows and pointed a gleaming silver finger at Sirius and Remus. "Hand over Black and this traitor, and you may leave with the others, Hagrid." Upon hearing this demand, Snape's eyes flickered, and he cast a sidelong glance at the two men Greyback had singled out, a sneer playing at the corners of his mouth. "A reasonable request, I think. It can be accommodated. So what do you two say?" Now is the time to demonstrate the heroic and fearless spirit of sacrifice. Harry was certain that Professor Lupin and Sirius would reject such an outrageous demand. To his surprise, after exchanging a glance with Sirius, Lupin spoke with a somber expression. "If we stay, will you truly let them go, Greyback?" "Professor Lupin," Hermione reverted to her formal address, exclaiming in disbelief, "You can't negotiate with werewolves. They can't be trusted." "Oh, sorry, I mean, you can't trust them." Perhaps it was Hermione's return to calling him Professor that softened Remus. He smiled gently and replied, "You don't understand the situation, Miss Granger." "No, Remus," Hagrid interjected gruffly. "Professor Dumbledore wouldn't agree with your decision. We have to return to Hogwarts together." Remus's decision shocked not only Harry and his friends, but also Snape. When he realized that Remus and Sirius were genuinely willing to stay, the joy vanished from Snape's face, replaced by a grim expression. "So, have you reached a decision?" Greyback admired his metallic hand under the scarlet moonlight, speaking impatiently. Truthfully, he wished none of them would escape tonight, but the werewolves had adversaries they couldn't afford to provoke. If he acted rashly, he might have to relocate his entire pack out of Europe. "Hagrid, we must ensure Harry and the others' safety," Lupin insisted. "No," Harry shouted vehemently. He understood that if Professor Lupin and Sirius were left behind, they would be in grave danger. "If we're leaving, we must all go back together." "You're as brave as your father, Harry," Sirius said, his voice tinged with emotion. "But Remus is right. You should leave. This pack of werewolves is beyond your ability to handle." Sirius and Remus's decision left Hagrid torn. He understood the gravity of the situation, but also knew that if Remus stayed, the werewolves would not spare him. As for Sirius, they would surely kill him and deliver his body to the Ministry of Magic for a bounty. The Ministry would prefer to see Sirius dead as a criminal rather than vindicated as a hero. End of this chapter. Chapter 299. "Hagrid, I don't want to leave," Harry exclaimed, drawing his wand to emphasize his determination. He looked at Lupin and said, "If my dad were here, he wouldn't want me to be a deserter." Snape sneered, but Sirius glared at him. "You don't understand, Harry," Lupin said, his voice tinged with frustration. "This isn't one of those skirmishes you have with Malfoy at school. This is a real fight. Do you know what that means? You'll witness the life of your enemy or your friend wither before your eyes. You'll feel the hot blood splatter on your face from hideous wounds, and you'll hear wails far more terrifying than the howls of ghosts. This is not something a few underage wizards can bear." "But," Hermione interjected, her voice trembling with fear, yet she mustered the courage to speak. "Harry defeated the Inferi last year. Professor Blaine has always encouraged us to face real danger. He believes it helps us grow." Remus sighed, then replied angrily, "I don't deny Atticus's statement, but I think it's a bit too radical." "Go back to school, Potter," Snape finally spoke, his voice carrying the same irritatingly light tone he used in class. "This is not a Quidditch pitch where you can play the hero." Harry glared at Snape, but Snape's eyes were as deep as an abyss, swallowing Harry's anger without a trace of a storm. "You all listen." Hagrid finally made up his mind, speaking in a voice only a few of them could hear. "Let's break through together. Sirius, you ride your motorcycle and take a few of the kids back to the castle first. As long as you escape, these werewolves won't be able to harm the rest of you." "What are you planning?" Greyback finally lost his patience. He gestured, and from the surrounding forest, hundreds of werewolves he had used to deal with the Golden Viper revealed their true forms. Though still human, the tyranny and ferocity in their eyes made the young wizards, who had never seen war, shudder. "Go!" Hagrid suddenly roared. Remus immediately raised his wand and fired a brilliant firework into the unfathomable night sky. "Damn bastards!" Greyback, realizing the distress signal, changed color. With a shrill wolf howl, his form transformed drastically. In the blink of an eye, Greyback disappeared, replaced by a werewolf covered in thorn-like gray hair, only a head shorter than Hagrid, with sinister and bloodthirsty eyes. The werewolf Greyback faced the blood moon and let out a long howl, signaling the surrounding werewolves to join in. "God, we're doomed," Ron muttered in despair, his legs threatening to give way. But Hagrid pulled him up with one hand and roared, "Rush out!" Hagrid threw Ron to Remus and led the charge. Several werewolves, unable to restrain their desire to attack, charged at Hagrid. Under Harry's terrified gaze, Hagrid slapped the lead werewolf across the face, deforming its head and sending it flying over 10 feet before it hit the ground. Hagrid then kicked out again, and with the sickening sound of bones cracking, the second werewolf spat blood. Harry, with his excellent dynamic vision, could see the broken rib piercing the werewolf's skin as it fell, seemingly lifeless. In the next instant, chaos erupted. Greyback leaped into the air, baring his sharp canines at Professor Lupin. Hermione screamed at the murderous grin, and Professor Lupin, holding Malfoy in one hand, stepped forward like a fencer thrusting his wand. "Protego!" he shouted, conjuring a faintly visible barrier in the breeze. In front of Remus, Atticus Blaine blocked Greyback's leap just in time. His expression was cold as he swung his wand with sudden force. In a daze, Harry thought he heard the clang of sharp knives being unsheathed. The 5 or 6 werewolves charging at Atticus seemed to collide head-on with an invisible blade. Flesh flew through the air, and the stench of blood splattered into the sky. This brutal scene had an unparalleled impact on the young students in the greenhouse. Even Ron was shaken, and for a moment Harry felt his legs weaken. He stared at Atticus in disbelief, finding it hard to reconcile this powerful figure with the man who usually lingered in the dark, damp basement surrounded by frog brains and bat livers. Sirius faced as many werewolves as any of them in the first wave, and his wand was still in Atticus's hand. Amidst the continuous howls, Sirius's body suddenly grew larger, transforming into a massive black dog reminiscent of a bear. He charged at the werewolves with no hesitation, the sound of their heavy collision making everyone sweat. Since entering Hogwarts, Harry, Hermione, and Ron had faced numerous crises together, experiences that most adult wizards could only dream of. Yet, Harry had to admit they were helpless in the current battle. The painful wails, the desperate eyes of the dying, and the bloody scenes unfolding before him were overwhelming. "Disarm! Disarm your weapon!" Sirius roared, entangled with several werewolves, creating a gap in their formation. A werewolf missing an ear seized the opportunity to charge at them. Harry instinctively raised his wand and cast a spell. The red light of the disarming charm hit the werewolf, but merely brushed past its mane, having no effect. In a critical moment, Sirius desperately shook off a werewolf biting his hind leg. He lunged forward like a madman, biting the neck of the earless werewolf and tossing it aside. But immediately, other werewolves surrounded him, each biting one of his legs and pulling in different directions, as if trying to tear him apart. "No!" Harry shouted, halting his retreat and preparing to rush forward. But before he could take a step, he caught Sirius's gaze. Those gray eyes were filled with determination. Sirius howled at Harry again. Though Harry couldn't understand the words, he knew Sirius was ordering him to retreat. Despite not having all the answers from Sirius and Professor Lupin, Harry finally believed in Sirius's innocence. It was the rat, Peter Pettigrew, who had betrayed his parents. Time seemed to freeze. Aside from Hagrid, who was leading the way, both Lupin and Atticus noticed the danger Sirius faced. However, Greyback's attack kept Lupin from intervening. He could only watch helplessly as Sirius was about to be torn apart. Atticus's pale cheeks twitched violently, revealing the inner turmoil and pain he was enduring. Despite this, he raised his wand, ready to help Sirius. Avada Kedavra! Just before Atticus's wand could fall, a sharp cry pierced through the chaos of the battlefield. The Reaper swung his scythe, and the dreadful green light descended upon Sirius. End of this chapter. Chapter 300. A mysterious green light flashed across Atticus Blaine's eyes, inching closer to the immobilized Sirius under the horrified gaze of everyone present. In that moment, between life and death, Atticus, who was nearest to Sirius, found himself unable to react. He was overwhelmed by his own predicament, a searing pain, as if a hot iron had been pressed against his scar, accompanied by a woman's scream echoing in his mind. The intensity of it all caused Atticus to faint, his body collapsing uncontrollably. Snape was the only one with the potential to save Sirius, but his attention was momentarily diverted by Atticus's fall, causing him to miss the crucial opportunity to act. Remus looked on in despair, while Sirius, facing the Grim Reaper, found a sense of peace in his gray eyes, as if finally resting after a long journey. "James, Lily, I'm sorry I haven't avenged you yet. And Regulus, forgive me for not giving you a proper funeral. Harry, I haven't fulfilled my duty as your godfather," Sirius thought, as a tear slipped from the corner of his eye. Suddenly, with a loud crack, rocks splintered, and the green light of the killing curse dissipated. Just 5 feet from Sirius, as death was about to claim him, a stone wall erupted from the soft ground, blocking the curse and sending the 2 werewolves attacking Sirius flying. The chaotic battlefield fell silent, everyone bewildered by the unexpected turn of events. "You saved me?" Sirius asked, shaking off the werewolf clinging to him and standing up, panting. He looked around and saw Snape's wand pointed in his direction. After a moment of silence, he nodded at Snape. "It wasn't me," Snape gritted his teeth, refusing to take credit. However, his denial was perceived as modesty, given the known animosity between him and Sirius. The adult wizards present assumed Snape was simply embarrassed. "Regardless, Severus," Remus said, panting as he patted Snape on the shoulder, "thank you for saving Sirius." Snape stiffened at Remus's touch, his face darkening as if he had been insulted. Who had cast the killing curse? The question lingered in everyone's minds, with a shared suspicion forming. Yet, the werewolves, driven mad by the full moon's magic, paid no heed. They charged from all directions, forming a living wall. "Stop standing there stupidly! Rush out!" Hagrid bellowed, clearing a path for them. He was soon overwhelmed, with several werewolves clinging to him, biting repeatedly. This only fueled Hagrid's fury, prompting a roar like a dragon's. He grabbed 2 werewolves by the throat, using them as weapons to fight back fiercely. "Go!" Snape shouted, tossing Sirius's wand back to him. He then hoisted the unconscious Atticus under his arm and roughly pushed the bewildered Hermione forward. At this critical juncture, Remus finally sprang into action. He swung his wand with vigor, sending blue curse lights flashing from its tip. The spells struck several werewolves, sending them howling into the air, silenced as they hit the ground. "Shameful traitor!" Greyback roared, his thick limbs digging into the earth. In the next instant, he became a blur, shattering Remus's armor with a resounding crack. The two rolled together, tumbling out of the camp that protected Atticus and the others. "Remus!" Sirius shouted, desperate to help. Atticus Blaine rushed forward to save Remus, but he found himself the primary target of the werewolves. Exhausted, he struggled to fend off the relentless onslaught. Suddenly, a terrifying roar echoed through the chaos, a sound Harry knew he would never forget. Lupin's transformation was horrifying. His head elongated, his body expanded, his shoulders hunched, and hair sprouted across his face and hands. His fingers morphed into claws. Standing on 2 feet like a bear, Lupin engaged Greyback in a vicious struggle, each biting and clawing at the other. With every swipe of their claws, bright red droplets sprayed into the air. Harry stood frozen, unable to move. But Hermione's voice cut through the din, shrill and panicked. "It's not a few. Lal Moon today, if I remember correctly." She glanced at the sky, sweat pouring down her face. The virus in Greyback's teeth disrupted the magical balance in his body. Snape's voice was strained, his greasy hair plastered to his face with sweat. His wand moved so swiftly it left an afterimage, tearing through werewolves or repelling them with an impenetrable barrier. The roars and dying wails of the werewolves were more terrifying than anything Harry had ever heard. He finally understood why even Atticus Blaine, with his daring teaching methods, never allowed younger students to face werewolves. Both sides were now consumed by rage. Greyback's command to spare the young wizards of Hogwarts was forgotten as the werewolves lost their minds. "Get down, Harry!" Sirius shouted, leaping from 20 feet away. He used a falling werewolf's shoulder as a springboard, tackling Harry to the ground. They rolled several times before coming to a stop against the lower half of another werewolf. "Harry!" Ron's legs buckled, and he and Malfoy lay flat on the ground. Hermione, drenched in sweat, raised her wand with trembling hands, her mind blank with fear. Suddenly, the werewolves pinning Harry down were flung backward. Sirius abandoned his wand, transforming into his animagus form to shield Harry. Blood trickled from a cut on his brow, staining his gray eyes red. He bared his teeth and growled at the advancing werewolves. Snape's breath caught in his throat when he saw Harry in danger. His face turned pale, and his chest didn't move until Sirius had driven the werewolves away. Snape's body trembled, his lips dry, but his dark eyes blazed with fury. Though reason kept him with Hermione and Ron, his expression was more ferocious than ever. Thick, foul-smelling black smoke poured from Snape's wand, forming into massive pythons that ensnared the approaching werewolves. The smoke serpents were incredibly toxic and corrosive, and the werewolves' screams were heart-wrenching as their bodies disintegrated like snowmen near a fire. The gruesome scene and the overpowering stench of blood made Hermione and Ron retch. Snape's spell, which vanquished over 20 werewolves, left him visibly drained. Atticus Blaine's body swayed unsteadily, his vision blurring as if everything before him was a ghostly mirage. The werewolves had already lost nearly half of their forces, yet those who remained were still formidable. Hagrid's motorcycle was securely positioned behind the human barricade, formed by the werewolves, making it seem as though any hope of breaking through was dwindling. End of this chapter.